I mean, you're really preaching to the choir about this, but
Sweet.
Just to, because I couldn't think more similarly. Yes, the thing that is unique about the Western world is because it has, so Christianity, essentially what it did is it provided a framework to where you could say, this has gone too far. Okay. Mm-hmm. It's essentially a safety valve. And now this is not to say that people have abused Christianity, like they've abused every faith, that's ever been on the planet, to
even
align
Buddhism,
with power and all these stuff. But you're right. It is the moral compass implanted that by Christianity that tells you that there's an abuse occurring. Yeah. It's what tells you that, people act like the elimination of slavery is like, it almost doesn't count for anything because we were doing it.
Right.
No one else did that. That's right. Immensely important.
Yep.
Immensely important. The British anti-slavery campaign was gigantic. People don't even understand. They were punishing their own businesses. They were sending people out to go patrol. Like, it was a whole endeavor. People have no clue how big the scale of this was. And it was undertaken. That whole movement was driven by Christian abolitionists.
Yep.
In the British Parliament.
Yep.
And again, like, all this stuff has always happened. Any people in power would commit atrocities the same way that they were committed on behalf of, quote unquote, Western culture. But again, what we have, I don't want to say to our credit, because I'm not like taking this as,
right.
This is something that makes me better. But just to put it all in perspective, I mean, the West is certainly not by any extent uniquely evil.
Hello, and welcome to the Renaissance of Men podcast. My name is Will Spencer. Maybe you've heard the term warrior poet from the movie Braveheart. It's a stirring phrase, but there's a problem. It's not like the guys at the end of Braveheart actually wrote poetry, or as the narrative establishes, could even read. So what this phrase is saying, I think, is that warriors should read poetry, but only because it makes them better warriors. Unfortunately, everything about this is wrong. Most people have no idea of what it takes to achieve artistic excellence. They cannot imagine the lifetime's worth of discipline, focus, and sacrifice required to produce a work of even marginal aesthetic value, not to mention cultural, theological, or even moral value. This is where the term warrior poet comes from, this misunderstanding. Because to produce great art is the act of a warrior who goes to war against the self, against resistance, inertia, mediocrity, and the material limits of canvas, clay, brass, words, and more. If warriors understood what it took to be a poet, they wouldn't say they fought like warrior poets at all. They'd just say they fought like poets. And this misunderstanding reflects a greater problem. The world is getting uglier. Beauty has been relegated to the status of objects to acquire, not experiences to have. There's a gap between us moderns and the experiences of beauty that people from prior centuries would have considered commonplace, which is why one man is building a bridge. His name is Evan Amato, and he's the founder of Rewire the West, a website and YouTube channel that helps men and women rediscover beauty, truth, and virtue in today's Western culture. The key word is rediscover, as in it's already there. The West has a centuries-long tradition of the arts that we can turn to, if only we know where to look. And that's Evan's goal, to create resources that point us in the right direction and kick us in the behind to send us on our way. He and I produced a series of videos about men's isolation, and I'm incredibly proud of it. That series is linked in the show notes. With it, I hope to make my own contribution to the Renaissance. And that's also why I'm grateful to feature Evan on my podcast today. In our conversation, Evan and I discussed the origins of Rewire the West, the mixed blessings of global travel, France as the best and worst country, how art is for the people, the Lord of the Rings and religion, and an examination of classical music you won't want to miss. If you enjoy the Renaissance of Men podcast, thank you. Please share this episode with a friend, and don't forget to like and subscribe, plus leave a comment letting us know what you thought. And please welcome this week's guest on the Renaissance of Men podcast, a champion for beauty, truth, and virtue, from Rewire the West, my friend, Evan Amato. Evan from Rewire the West, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Hello, hello. Thanks for having me.
And you and I have gotten the chance to work pretty closely over the past few months, and we've had a lot of great conversations. And I have such great appreciation for what you're doing with your project and the values that you're trying to bring forward, and the way that you've involved me in that, and the way that we've been able to work together. And so I've been looking forward to having this conversation because I have so many questions about what it is that you're doing, why, where it came from, and what the vision of it is. So, and plus arts and culture and all the other things that we have a shared affinity for. So I've been looking forward to this.
As have I. As have I. The respect is very much mutual.
Thank you. Well, let's start at the best place. Let's start at the beginning. Like, where I actually don't know much about your background, believe it or not. Like, I've had a lot of conversations, but like, I know who you are. I know where you live. I know your values, but it's like, where did this man come from? He emerged out of the forest a year ago.
That's actually exactly how it happened.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yes. So,
okay. Next question. Moving on.
Actually, some real background from North Carolina originally. My family's not particularly Southern. My parents are they're both up from the North. And anyways, grew up in North Carolina, and then a big turning point in my life, kind of, normal life up to 16 or so. And then at that point, something unique happened, which is that I got to go to Argentina and spend several months there by myself. And essentially how that kind of came about was I was in a Spanish class in high school and really wanting to learn, obviously, the language and kind of get a deeper dive into it. And I had been looking up summer programs and whatnot to go to Spain, for example, and kind of practice the language. They're all way too expensive. So in the end, I wasn't really going to go. And then one day I was walking down the hallway and this guy comes up to me. He's like, "Hey, are you the kid who wants to learn Spanish?" I said,
maybe.
Yeah, I suppose so. I'm one of them at least.
Yeah.
He said, "All right, well, listen up. I've got a buddy of mine. He's the principal of a high school in Argentina. You're going to send him an email and just see what happens." It's like, okay. It turns out he was like our high school soccer coach. I didn't play soccer, really. I wasn't in that world at the time. So I had no clue who he was. Came to get to know him. But anyways, shoot this principal an email. And he's essentially like, "Yeah, just buy your plane ticket. Come on down here. We'll find places for you to stay. And you'll get to hang out with us for several months." I was like, wow. Okay. So
I guess that's how that works.
Exactly. So did just that. And it was like, honestly, as crazy as it sounds, looking back on it, I have no idea how my parents ever allowed that really to happen. It was the first time I had ever been out of the country, much less travel by myself. And so anyways, buy this plane ticket, go down to Argentina. And the only moment of fear or panic, perhaps, I ever had was right when I got off the plane. It was going through customs and everyone was seemingly speaking at 100 miles an hour. And I just said, "Oh my goodness, this was the biggest mistake." And just like, I'm locked into it, but you have to commit. And anyways, did it and turned out to be one of the most amazing experiences of my life, which really changed my life up to this day. So, was spent time with a bunch of different people down there. Obviously, the experience of getting to learn the culture and the language really shaped me. Made friends that I'm still very, very, very close with to this day. And I went back down there a couple years later in university. I won a grant to go down and spend some more time doing service actually in one of the big shanty towns that they have. Essentially, like if you know the favelas in Brazil, is the equivalent of that. Literally a police no-go zone in Buenos Aires. No water, no sanitation, any of that. But
yeah.
Anyways, got to go spend some more time down there, and then after that trip, I wanted to. It kind of like got the bug going of, all right, let's see what else is out there. And I should actually perhaps back up if you really want the whole story between this time. So of high school into university, I went to Nashville, Tennessee, and got involved in the music industry. So I was doing a bunch of stuff out there, got to do some really fun stuff as well. Like eventually got to work at the Latin Grammys and the actual Grammys. And that was, really fun and cool for a kid of my age. But anyways, at the time I was like, there is no place other than Nashville that I ever want to live.
Uh-huh.
And that was my perspective. And there was a bunch of artists who I was working with. And anyways, I figured, you know what, like I'll go back down to Argentina and do this thing just kind of cause, and went back down there. And then that was the moment where everything changed that trip for whatever reason, but just kind of saw like, actually the one place I can't be is Nashville. Now it's going to have to be, you know, anywhere other than this. Like there's still so much more out there to engage with, to explore. And so from there, I went to Spain for 6 months. And then once I was in Spain, that was kind of my first exposure to Europe.
Where were you in Spain?
I was in Madrid.
Okay.
Yep. I was in Madrid, got to travel around a little bit though, not only in that country, but to a couple other countries in Europe. But most of the time I was in Madrid. Typically when I travel, I hate to bounce around. I really like to stay in one spot and really get to know it as much as I can. So anyways, did that. Then once I was in Spain, I thought, and this is kind of the story of my life too, Will, is that I'll say, never, ever will I ever do this. And then I end up doing it 5 years later.
Yeah. It's like sure way to guarantee you're going to do it.
Yeah, exactly. So there's the thing with like Nashville where I said, never am I going to go anywhere else. And then, you know, a couple months later, it turned into, well, anywhere other than here. And then I had always, for some reason, disliked French. I don't know. Well, I didn't really have a reason other than
it's natural for an American.
I was petty and, you know, thought, hey, Spanish is cool or whatever. And then when I was in Spain, I was like, you know what? Like, why stop with Spanish? Why not learn French? And so then anyways, I went to France for another 6 months or so. After that, had a really great experience and figured out a way of getting back in the country for another year after that. And then kind of through other miscellaneous trips and work and whatnot. So part of what I was doing in France, actually, I was working with refugees. I've had a lot of experience working with refugees and immigrants, both in the U.S., in South America, so in Argentina, and also in France in particular. And obviously the situation is very drastically different in all three places. But anyways, I was working in France right up until the time that COVID happened. And then the lockdowns in France were just insane. And I could have stayed a lot longer than I did. But at some point I was just like, no, I have to go back. Because it was literally, to give an idea, you know, I was staying in a room, I mean, really small, essentially like room for a single bed, a twin bed, and a desk right next to it. And that was it. I was staying in that room and they said, you can go out up to twice a day, once to work out for 30 minutes within 5 kilometers of your residence or something. And the other one to go get groceries only at the grocery store that is closest to you. And so I was just like, this is nuts. I'm going to go back home. And so went back home for a bit. And then once COVID finally started to relax a little bit, I ended up getting a job and moved to London. And so lived there for close to a year. And then somewhere in between all this, fell in love with an Italian woman and moved out here to Italy and got married as well.
Wow. Well, I think you're a testimony to the value of travel, right? I think a lot of people, in America, because as you know, I've traveled a bit, and one of the things that people always say is like, oh, you know, like 20% of Americans have passports, right? Stuff like that. And it's like, well, what that conceals is the fact that in order for an American to really go anywhere, you have to cross an ocean. You have to travel a long way out of America, right? Exactly. And America is an enormous country with basically every other kind of land formation you'd like to see: deserts, grasslands, swamps, mountains. Like we have it all. And
so, a continent. People lose track of that. Like it's a continent, not just a country.
Yes, exactly. And it's you know, and it's expensive to leave. Like not everyone has access to the funds or the time to do meaningful overseas travel. Yeah. However, those who do, right, inevitably come back changed as a result of it. you you went to Spain first and then Argentina, or was it Argentina first and then
It was
Spain?
Argentina first.
Argentina first. So and Buenos Aires, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's where I've been. I've been to a couple places in Argentina as well, but Buenos Aires is where I started. And that kind of experience, and you were 16, was that how old you were? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at 16 years old, to go to a country like Argentina, which looks like America in a lot of ways, but it's definitely not the same, right? It's a very, well, and what year was this? This would have been like 2000, something like that, maybe? I don't even know how old you are. You might
know. I'm trying
2005?
No, later than that, too. Trying to think. Boy, 10 years ago or so?
Okay, so like 2010. Okay. So
yeah, around there.
Yeah, so I was at Argentina in 2016. So, okay. But I think at the time when I went to Argentina, there was this big new development on the waterfront, all these shiny glass, buildings. I don't know if that was there then, but
I know the neighborhood because I've seen some pictures of your travels. I know where you were. That part of that was there.
Mm-hmm.
The economic situation definitely got a lot worse from when I was there to when you were.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I revisited in 16 as well. I spent some more time there then.
Yeah, where that Calatrava bridge is, that sort of, yeah. Well, like to get to go down to Argentina at that stage and at that age, it can't help but change you, especially for 6 months. Like it's not a 2-week kind of trip. Yeah. Like you get to really marinate in the culture. Like, well, what was that? Like when you landed, what was that experience besides everyone speaking, 1,000 miles a minute, which is like, yeah. But what were some of the cultural things that you did that really impacted you at that stage, coming from North Carolina of all places, in Nashville?
Yep. Well, the first time I was there, I think I was really shocked at just the different dynamic and interpersonal relations, specifically familial ones. So, for example, in Argentina, everyone already, they eat pretty late, like 10 p.m. is a normal dinner time. But every meal would be, you're waiting for the family to be there. So whether it's waiting to come back from school and have lunch there or waiting for dinner, everyone would wait. Whereas I don't want to, say I never did that. We had family dinners growing up, but it was not nearly with the same level of severity in terms of like, we're all going to wait until everyone's, around the dinner table.
Right.
In Argentina, they also give kisses, kind of a European thing, but they give actually on each cheek. I remember the first time I made a fool of myself in Spain. In France. When like one of the first times I was there, I met a dude and I just like went to give him a kiss on both cheeks, which is like, first of all, in France, it's typically just one, but also you only really do that with like closer friends. Yeah. And so anyways, it was just kind of funny, but like in Argentina, in Argentina, you do it with everyone. And so, and every time too that you enter or exit a room, it's like you're going around, saying goodbye to people and kind of giving them, a kiss. So that was a big impact. Mate, I don't know if you got to drink any yerba mate while you were there.
That's
I actually got super into that, like really, really into that, and
with
not
the straw and the whole thing.
Of course, no, like not at all the commercialized American crap that there is. I literally like, this is crazy too. I've gotten stopped at customs before because I've had like kilos of yerba in my bag. Like not even a joke. Like literally I've gotten
wrapped in plastic,
like unpacked. Yeah. They literally like sell them by the kilo. It is hilarious too. Yeah. Because it's like, think it's not tea, but it's kind of like a tea leaf in terms of how much it would weigh. So it's not like small little kilos. I mean, it's a big bag, so you're carrying like a kilo of this thing and they're like, we're going to have to investigate this. But anyways, got really into it, like started collecting all these mates, different bombichas, all this stuff. But the reason wasn't just like, I want to start collecting these things to be cool. It was like, really, I got into the culture of it, which there is a very, very, strong culture around it. And particularly if you're drinking with older people, they actually have a manner in which it is drink, however you want to conjugate that verb. So for example, there's someone who I guess we should maybe explain for people who aren't familiar with it. It's essentially, yerba mate is essentially a drink that is very akin to tea. On a biological level, it is not tea. Like, it's not the same plant as tea. But for all intents and purposes, we'll say it's the same.
Yeah.
And what you drink it out of is a hollowed gourd. Now, you can have different types. You can have an actual gourd, so, a pumpkin squash that's kind of hollowed out and hardened. You can have wood, like wood is kind of my favorite. You can have plastic, you can have a couple other ones, and you actually there's this process that you have to do. You have to cure the mate. So that is called the mate, whereas the yerba is that's the tea like thing. And you buy the mate and then you have to cure it. There's a certain way that you put old used yerba into it and you let it sit for a couple of days and whatnot. And you get this. And then anyways, you go and there's a very specific way of how you fill the mate with yerba. So you have to fill it in a correct way to where the bombilla, which is the straw that filters out the leaves, to where that's inserted and is at an optimal level, essentially, to where the yerba is at a slant, so that every time you pour in hot water, how would you say it? It sits with the leaves that are already there, but it also trickles in some new ones, some fresh one.
Okay.
So you're constantly getting this new. And then, so that's just in terms of how you actually prepare the drink. And then in terms of how you drink it, again, you have to consider it's this small little gourd that you can kind of fit in the palm of your hand, and you'll fill it up and then someone will drink it. And you could, drink it just and then you're done. That is my straw impression. So that duration of drink, all right,
yes,
there we go.
Nice.
Thank you.
Very nice.
And you're going to drink that, and then you'll give it back to the person who's actually the head of the ceremony. Okay. And they'll take it from you, they'll pour it, and then they'll hand it to someone else. Right. That person will drink, they'll hand it back to the main person. They will again fill it with water and then pass it to another person. So you're all kind of sitting around having this. And it's very specific, actually, because you can tell if you're drinking with someone who knows how to drink it versus someone who doesn't. Because there's a rhythm to where you don't want to drink it too fast, but you also can't let it just sit in your hands. So because if you let it, if you don't drink it, so if you're just kind of holding it and letting it sit there, A, it's going to get cold. B, it's going to make the leaves far too bitter. Okay. So you want to avoid that. But you also don't just want to chug it and then pass it on. So it's kind of you get it, you sit with it. All right, maybe take a sip. There we go. Sit with it. All right, maybe take another sip, sit with it. And then you can finish it off if you want, and then you'll hand it back. But
right.
when you're having a conversation with a group of people, it creates a flow to the conversation, a rhythm, if you will.
Yeah.
I'd liken it now to the way that you kind of have to smoke a pipe with the right duration to keep it lit. So you can't chug it, because if you try to smoke a pipe too fast, you're just going to completely run through it. It's going to get really sour. It's going to burn or go out. It's not bad. It's not good. But you also you want to be letting it sit for a little bit, but you also need to do enough to keep it lit. And so that's on a personal level because it's a pipe. But with this mate, what's cool is that you're all kind of doing this communally. So anyways, that was something that obviously inspired me enough to go on a tangent about it on your podcast, but obviously also, influenced me in terms of kind of what I got out of being abroad and seeing just different ways of interacting and interacting with others, just getting exposed to different customs and whatnot, and being able to apply those to my life as well. So everywhere that I've gone since, I'll pick up things and, try to apply them to my life. So anyways, that's probably one of the biggest, takeaways, at least from that first trip that I spent down there.
Well, let's jump off that, because I think you said a bunch of really important and interesting things, particularly around the shared communal experience of something like that. So as you were saying, the mate, which I didn't get to experience when I was down there, but I have experienced hookah, right?
Okay.
Right. And then you mentioned pipe smoking, and there are all these, I guess, overseas practices, you might call them, that we import them into America, and they're sort of held up as like status symbols, like, oh, look how worldly I am because I do this thing, right? And maybe becomes a trend because of someone saw something on a podcast or YouTube or whatever.
Yeah.
But the thing that gets lost is that these are social experiences that are meant to enhance a group getting together and being together. You know, like when you go smoke hookah at like a hookah lounge or whatever in America, you know, here's this pipe that everyone's kind of sitting around and smoking, and they've taken the object out of the context that it would exist in a place like Morocco, right? Where it's a completely different experience. And so what you're describing in the mate is like, no, it's a ritual component, like not a religious ritual, but it's a social ritual that's embedded in the culture. And we don't really have those in the United States. You know, I guess sometimes guys will watch a sport, like a football game, you know, which is not exactly the same. We'll go out drinking together, not exactly the same, because you're orienting your social interactions around this thing that you're all doing together, you know, that isn't taking your attention away. You know, it's like you're watching a TV and it's taking your attention away versus the mate is enhancing. So I think that's really important.
Exactly.
Americans don't really, I can't think of any social rituals that we have that are quite like that.
I think that's accurate. I would add to that unfortunately a lot of what happens to America is when you import these things, which is good in itself, to import and to get them, but then we commercialize the heck out of it. It's really like we'll import it, commercialize it, and then try to fit it into some realm of productivity as well. So, for example, like most things I see of mate when it comes to the States, it's like packaged in this cold brew thing. And it's like, oh, this is a super healthy tea, which it is, but it's all catered towards this one, like, oh, productivity or, you know, smooth caffeine benefit and this sort of thing. Like it's completely alienated from its initial context. I've never smoked hookah, so I don't know what that's like, but I can only imagine, you know, it's far more commercialized in the States than it is abroad. I think there's certainly a lot of that. And to my great dismay, that even happens on large cultural levels. And I think the best example, not only because I think it actually is the best example of this happening in the States, but also because I have a personal affinity to it, is Italian culture. Like Italian culture in the US is a complete caricature.
Yes.
Even by like the Italian Americans themselves, it is a complete caricature. And it really breaks my heart because
whoa. Hold on now. Super Mario.
Exactly.
That's what it's like over there, right?
Yes. I mean, it really is like, I think there's actually reasons for it, which we could get into if you'd like, but,
yes,
I think it's just tough to see stuff like that because then it gets kind of degraded. And I guess what's most sad to me about it all is that people think they know when they don't know. And I don't mean this in an elitist way, like, oh, I know, but you don't know. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the actual thing is very, very rich. And if you got to know it in its true context, you'd realize that it is a prime rib steak, but you're just eating a hamburger. You know, so please, for your own sake, you know, experience it as it's meant to be experienced.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's a really great observation about the commercialization, objectification, and then the productivity aspects of it, as opposed to the sheer joy of simply enjoying drinking mate together. Like it doesn't have to have a larger purpose. It doesn't have to serve your productive day. It doesn't have to enhance your social status. It just has to be a bunch of friends getting together and enjoying the rhythm of conversation centered around the sharing of this beverage. Like not every minute of every day has to be dedicated to productivity. And that is something that I think Americans really struggle with, not just on a cultural level, the way the culture moves us, you know, as this, our own cultural force moves us to behave in certain ways. I think we as Americans aren't just good in general at settling into just doing a thing for the sake of doing a thing. And I could speculate as to many reasons why that might be. But the idea of just like, no, you're going to put your phone down. There's no purpose to this. This is not, you know, whatever it is we're going to do right now isn't going to serve some larger productivity end goal. We're going to do the thing just for the sake of doing it. right? We don't have to
Yeah.
put it on Instagram, right? And I
Yep.
think that's something that Americans really struggle with. And I think it's a real affliction of the American soul that they don't actually have that. And maybe we don't even know. And that's the benefit of travel is you go to these other countries that they don't take their productivity as seriously as Americans do for good reasons, right? And not always good reasons, but sometimes good reasons. And they have a better quality of life. So Americans go overseas and they're like, I want to live like the whole world should be like this. And then they lose a sense of context, right?
Yep.
And so I think you've highlighted something really important that's worth exploring.
Yeah. And I love what you added in the last point is that Americans lose the sense of context because everything has its pros and cons, you know, and I think another thing that's pissed me off. So to also kind of put my timeline in context, I've spent more or less the majority of the past 6 years living abroad, specifically in Europe. And kind of the other travels were a little bit before that. But even my just perspective of what Europe actually is and having lived in at least, 4 countries over here, it's changed a lot. It's evolved a lot over those 6 years. But one thing I've noticed is that when people come on vacation, you are seeing a very, very isolated part of that world, which is completely foreign in many ways from actually living there. And so, and the same things like what you would hear about in the news or whatnot, is just so distant from what the on the ground reality is. And so, you know, there are things that I love about America and there are things that I love about life in Southern Europe. But each one certainly comes with its pros and cons. There are not, you know, there's not a flat out, oh, this is better. Or the one thing I can't stand is when just Americans who like, you know, hear about, I don't know, they'll hear about one like social policy in Europe and they're like, we need to follow Europe's example. And I'm like, well,
it's not the same.
No, like it's completely different context. You just can't replicate stuff the same way, nor would you necessarily even want to if you understood it. So yeah, I think that's important. I don't really know where I'm going with that, but I'll let you take it from there.
No, I'm happy to drive this conversation about travel for the next 5 hours like this, because this is something that's so important. Because I've been to enough countries, particularly in Asia, like China, like going to China and India. Like China and India, especially India, is the country that is least like America that I'd been to. Right? I mean, it's you know. Japan and go ahead.
Sorry.
Jump in.
On the India note, I spent some time in India as well.
Here we go.
The one thing that I would say is that actually Indians as people, okay, culturally, I really love them. And I was talking to a European friend of mine about this because he's an entrepreneur. And I know, which is kind of crazy, French, even at that.
French entrepreneur?
I know, French entrepreneurs.
Like, how do they get any work done with all the French stuff that French do?
Well, he lives in New York for a reason.
Oh, there you go. It's like Italian entrepreneur. Like what?
Exactly. Yeah, but we were talking about like we were talking about kind of the ethic. And in terms of kind of maybe work ethic or approach to doing things. And one thing that I love about India is that people will make the most out of almost any opportunity that's presented in front of them.
Yeah, you got it.
So it's like I've just seen some of the most innovative stuff going on there, you know, because it's like they don't have access to resources in the same way that many of us would. But with what they have, they're forced to innovate. They're forced to be creative. And they are just like, I love what they come up with. I've just had my mind blown so many times by like, wow, I love the work ethic here. I love the creativity. I love the innovation. Whereas like a lot of people in continental Europe, for example, the streets are paved with gold, you know, financially and on a security basis and whatnot, but then they don't do anything with that. And so it's kind of like, I would, in that sense, I'd say, well, in some ways, actually, like I kind of like maybe on a business level, let's say I could get along with an Indian better than I could, you know, a random Frenchman.
Yeah. And this gets a little bit into, and this is great. And I'd be happy to continue this line of conversation because it's very rare that I get to have it, is that every country has its light side and its shadow side, its light side
Mm-hmm.
and its dark side, right? So let's talk about let's just go with the United States. Oh no, what I was going to say is Argentina or Italy
Okay.
or wherever, right? Okay. So when I travel, this is when I realized this existed. It was when in Argentina. There's something in many overseas countries, not all, but many, called the tourist bubble. And the
Mm-hmm.
tourist bubble is a bubble that like when you said people going to Italy, like people who come on vacation in Italy, the Italy that they see is just a small slice of the larger overall country.
Yep.
Excuse me. So that's the tourist bubble. And the tourist bubble exists for two reasons. The first reason is to tightly control what the tourist experience of whatever country is.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a marketing thing. It's like theater is a component of theater. The tourism industry is designed to carefully curate excuse me, your experience as a visitor so that you walk away having a good time with a good impression of the country. That makes sense, right? Like we as people have personas. Why wouldn't a nation have a persona, right? Okay. So the tourist bubble serves that positive function. It also serves another function of protecting people from the realities of the countries that they're visiting. So, for example, if you were to go to Mexico, right, or you go to a place like a 5-star resort, and Mexico is a good example. You're within the walls of the 5-star resort, and you're experiencing a particular side of Mexico. But if you were to go to the other side of the walls, you would see a very different country. Now, whatever level of peace or prosperity is actually going on there, which it varies, you as a Western visitor, like if you were to go there, you would be going backstage. So it actually protects the people of the country from the Western visitor eyes who can't understand what they're looking at. So in
Yep.
Argentina, right, I went from Buenos Aires to Bariloche, right, and then I went down to Torres del Paine, and then went down to Ushuaia. Like I followed the very Fitzroy. I followed the very worn tourist trail throughout Argentina and did not experience a lot of the rest of the country like I did elsewhere. And so I got to see the good side of Argentina. I didn't get to see the shadow side of Argentina. Right. Okay. But then in India or China, it's all mashed together. There is no tourist trail in these countries. You are subjected to the light and the shadow side of all the countries just right there in your face. And it can be a lot for people. And in that, I learned that every country has a light side and a dark side. So India, now we'll come back to India. India has this ethic that you're describing, like make it work. It's called Jugaad, right? Make it work. Whatever it is, whatever resources you have, make it work. And as wonderful as that is, the shadow side of that is that good enough is good enough. And so that's the experience of India. Like, yeah, we made the building. The building is standing. Cool. We did what we had to make it, but we don't actually have to make it beautiful or efficient, right? Or safe, right? And so as you're talking about India, as you're talking about Italy, as we're talking about America, like there's so much good about America. And what usually happens is that people go travel and then they're subjected to the shadow of America and they completely lose sight of what's amazing about this country. And so that's kind of the thing that I hear you articulating in a way. It's like when you live in a place like Italy for a long time, you see all the things that are really good about it, or France or Argentina. And I'm sure you see the things that are less good. And it's not about trying to make one country into the image of another. It's about appreciating the light and dark of a country like a person. It's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah. And I think more than anything, that's what I've been really fortunate with in my travels is that and everywhere I've been able to see both sides.
Yeah.
I've never been subjected to the tourist bubble, mainly because I've either spent time in a very like, I hate to say this, authentic fashion. I'll give an example of what I mean by that. And the other times and if not that, then it's just, I've spent enough time there. So for example, I went to, Cuba. I spent some time in Cuba as well, but we spent literally like my connection was I knew a cleaning lady whose brother was a pastor in Cuba. And so a buddy and I went down and we said, hey, we're going to spend a couple weeks here, but like we didn't stay at all. We lived on a Cuban budget and we stayed in a suburb of Havana, which was essentially like a room, the lady who we would stay with kind of this the woman I knew in the States. Her mother, I mean, her house was a concrete, I don't 7 foot by 7 foot square, and then like one small little side room for a bathroom and kitchen.
Yep.
And that was it.
Yep.
And like dirt roads. I mean, you would think honestly that you were in the middle of Africa.
Yep.
It was really crazy. So like seeing that, and I hear people be like, Cuba's amazing. And I'm like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
I was 20 minutes by foot outside of the center, and it like, no, not that.
Yeah.
And then in
That's
Morocco
the bubble.
too.
That's the tourist bubble.
Yeah, exactly. And then Morocco too. This is actually, you'll appreciate this story. When I was in France, I made friends with a bunch of Moroccans. And one of them, we were walking through the city one day, and it was kind of in my earlier stages of being in this particular city. And so we're like, where's the train station? He said, oh, it's that way. I said, no, you're crazy. It can't be that way at all. And he said, yeah, like he was super confident. I was super confident. And I said, all right, let's put money on it. Like a whole round of drinks for you and your friends, whoever loses, essentially. And so anyways, I lost the bet. So there I was taking him and his buddies out to drink,
How many
the
buddies?
next weekend. A
12.
bunch, like there. Yeah. So double digits. So anyways, we were there, we were having a great time, like having a really fun time. And anyways, at one point he's like, you've got to come back to Morocco with me. And I was like, all right, dude, like whatever, kind of having fun.
Sure.
And then I texted him the next day. And I maybe he texted me or I texted him. I don't really know how it happened, but basically like, all right, now that you're sober, offer still stand. And he's like, yeah. So anyways, like flew down with him, a month later. He from a small town, 30 kilometers east of Casablanca. And got to like meet his family, spend time there. And then he had a brother in Marrakesh and another in Rabat. And so, getting to like go through there and kind of seeing all, the good and the bad and take them public transport and like all this stuff. It was excellent. It was wonderful. But yeah, I've never like no country I've been to, I've ever walked away being like, this is the best ever. Yeah. Because I know that it's not like if you spend enough time there, if I'm being honest with myself, I think my first time in Europe, like after I got back from maybe my first trip in Europe, I was kind of that perspective, like, oh, this is so cool,
happens to a lot of Americans.
You spend 1 year more actually like living there, and you start to realize, actually no, for many reasons. And then, you stay there during a global pandemic, and then, during right now, like a economic crisis and a war on the continent, like It's just a totally different scenario.
Yes. We as Americans, it's very difficult to appreciate the truth behind some of the propaganda that we hear growing up. Right. Like, and what I've come to say after travel is like, look, not every country in the world needs to be like America, but the world needs a country like America, right? Yeah. And to be born in the United States, to have U.S. citizenship, is a profound gift and blessing. It's incredible. And the only way that you can really appreciate that is by doing what you did, which is even going to a country in Europe, because what a lot of kids do is they'll do, it's like some sort of gap year thing, or in the early 20s, they'll travel through Europe. Right. And then they'll like, oh, this is amazing. There's the sidewalk cafes and, the attitudes are so liberal and there's all this healthcare, and they get really enamored of this model, this European model, again, with a lack of context. And they inevitably become super, super politically liberal as a result. We should be more like Europe. Okay. So what happened to me, like I didn't go in with any expectations. I traveled the rest of the world and I became super conservative because I started. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean the exact same thing. Yeah. Like I went out, and maybe the first time, when you're first exposed and you've seen just a fraction of it, you start to go kind of more like, like, oh, like America, whatever.
I love that voice.
But then like literally the more time I spend abroad, the more time I'm like, I love America. My gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, especially when I got back from COVID and people talk about
which country
American
is COVID?
freedom. Sorry. When I got back from France, yes, the COVID.
Yeah.
Anyways, when I got back from France as like refugee from, dealing with COVID over there, people talk about, oh, American freedom. Like we talk about it and everywhere's free. Like, no, like I got to go outside and meet people and walk around and like, it was amazing. And I came to respect that a heck of a lot, and even doing business here, cause I'm someone who's relatively entrepreneurial and just seeing
relatively meaning very
easy. Yeah. Like how easy it is to do business in the US is remarkable.
Yeah.
And now people will say like, oh, well, America, it cares too much about business. But actually, I think I've really come to firmly believe this is that business, what it does more than anything is it drives innovation. You have to allow for entrepreneurship to drive innovation. And innovation is what ultimately makes it brings more opportunities to people. And it ameliorates bad living conditions. So I look at a lot of like what I see in Europe, for example, where it's so Western Europe in particular, where it's so hard to do business. And like, there are tons of people I know who they have job security, but they can't leave their job because they will not find another one.
Mm-hmm.
In the French, okay, let me give you a insane example. This is true. So France is one of the most difficult countries to start a business in.
Mm-hmm. It's generally true of Europe.
Yep. But France in particular, one of the hardest countries to start a business in, but they have one of the highest startup rates in all of Europe. So riddle me this. The reason that is precisely because of the fact that they've made it so difficult for their own citizens to start businesses. They now subsidize foreign businesses coming into France to raise their businesses there and hire French employees.
So let me make sure I understand. They hire foreign nationals to come into France so citizens
they
of other
don't hire
countries,
the foreign nationals. The French government subsidizes foreign companies to make it easier for them to come into France as startups, thus hiring the French people.
Why don't they just change? I mean, I know why, but why don't they change the laws so that French people can start their own businesses?
Exactly. But like, that's actually backwards. Yeah, exactly. Like it's actually, it is literally that ridiculous.
Yeah.
That's what people don't get. And it's remarkable to me. Like, why would you not? Because essentially you're taking the wealth out of your country because that's the taxpayers' money that's going to subsidize foreign entities to then give them employment, which is never going to be the same thing. Like you are going to take care of your house better than anyone else's. So instead of empowering their own populace to create those jobs and then give employment to others, their compatriots, they're instead doing it with foreign enterprises coming in who don't care about the French people nearly as much. So it's it's ridiculous. And for that reason, sorry, I know I'm getting very impassioned about this.
No, please get it. I've never gotten impassioned about anything.
Yeah, like for that reason, I fully believe in the power of actually, liberalizing a market. By that, I mean freeing it up to make it easier to do business because it allows for innovation, allows people to switch jobs. It allows, there to be competition, which, forces people to get better. Like it's so different. And especially too, kind of last thing I'll say is working with refugees in these different environments. I know for a fact, they have the best chances of succeeding for their future generations in America, hands down.
Mm-hmm. The refugees have a better chance of succeeding in America than they do anywhere else, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Forget all the generous, subsidies and welfare that France has, that the UK has, like in America, without a doubt. I mean, I've seen it firsthand. I know people who have come to the US within a generation, gone on to become business owners. Their children gone on to be medical professionals, within one generation.
Yeah.
It's remarkable, and it's partially because of just how we do things. And look, I know America too. Like I mean, I grew up there, so I know that we have things that are to be improved upon
Mm-hmm.
without a doubt. But we're certainly not the backwater country of the Western world, as some people might cast it.
No, we're absolutely not. And what's so funny is when I was getting ready to go to India, well, I lived in San Francisco for many years, and for a while I had an Indian roommate who was from Goa. Right, he was from
Okay.
Goa, Mumbai. He was from that region, and had immigrated with his family when he was young, engineer, coder, and all that stuff. And so he and I were friends. And so when I finally bought my ticket to go to India, I messaged him like, "Hey," his name is McNeil. I said, "Hey,
Mm-hmm.
McNeil, I'm really excited to go to India." And he messaged me back. He said, "Why?" And I was like, "What?" Like, I've been looking forward to going to India for a really long time, not because I had any projections of it, but because I knew that there was something there for me. Not because like, oh, it's going to be this amazing spiritual experience. No, I wasn't looking for
Mm-hmm.
any of that. But I was looking for something else that I'll have to struggle to articulate later. But he said, "Why?" And that really stuck with me. And it wasn't until I spent 2 or 3 or 4 months there that I understood what he meant.
Hmm.
Why he would ever wonder, from my perspective, why I'd be interested to go to India, because so many people are from not just India, but from all these other countries where the weight of corruption, the weight of culture, the weight of religion, the stultifying weight of religion, family, tradition weighs on people around the world. Like, in the sense of, we
Yeah.
do these things because this is how we do these things, and it's enforced on people to keep them these little kind of boxes. But we in America take for granted that individualism is the highest value. Like, no one has any claim over what we do as individuals in America. It's just in our blood somehow, that if you
Mm-hmm.
decide that you want to, I mean, it's taken a bit too far now, but if you grow up in a small town, let's say you grew up in a small town anywhere, Oklahoma, right? And your father runs a farm, pick it, doesn't matter the business. And you decide that rather than taking on the inheritance of 5 generations of your family farm, and whatever the traditions of your town are, and your family name, and all that stuff, if you say, "I'm going to go to the big city to be an author," or whatever, that tradition, family has no claim over you. And we just know that in America. It's like, we just know that the father would be like, "Okay, that's hard for me to hear, but I support you, go do that," right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus in other countries around the world, India, Europe, whatever, if you were to grow up in a small town with this family business and all that stuff, and you say, "I'm going to the big city," the full weight of tradition, culture lands on you. Family, especially family. Like, you can't leave the family. Like, where are
In
you
many
going?
in many ways, that sentence, "I'm going to the big city," would be akin to saying, "You're dead to me."
Yes, exactly right. And in America, it's like, good luck on your big adventure, hero, right? Even though it may hurt the father or the family and they may not want that, they still acknowledge unconsciously the value of that individual journey. They may be upset, they may push back, they may argue, but very rarely will they say what you just said, which is like, "You're dead to me, don't ever talk to me again." But in other countries around the world, you are abandoning your family, and very much so. And
Hmm.
that the way that holds the country together is very powerful, and the way that it holds these countries back is also very powerful. And it's only by spending a lot of time in these countries overseas that you can really get that, because otherwise you'll
Yeah.
look at it and it'll be invisible. You won't be able to see it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I loved hearing that, because I think it's wonderfully accurate. And just to add to it, a small thing is that even when we do go abroad, we often to go abroad, not so much for even tourism, but to even live. Like me in Italy right now, I have the leisure of working with Americans.
Mm.
And working like with an American company
Oh
and earning
man.
in U.S. dollars. That
Oh
makes my experience in Italy far different, even still, than the average Italians.
yeah.
Um, and so I'm very, very fortunate for that. Incredibly, incredibly grateful for what the simple fact of being born in America, where I was born, offers me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's very difficult for Americans to appreciate that, because it's very difficult for Americans to have, discover, or even take the opportunity to go live abroad in a
Mm-hmm.
completely foreign culture. Like, I think the opportunities are there. Um, but I mean, like missionary trips are a good example for churches, study abroad in college and stuff like that. But, for some people, the notion of doing it, whether if it even comes their way, is terrifying, right? They're just scared of the other, right? And so I'm not the kind of person who thinks that, everyone in the world should travel the way I or you did. I don't believe that. I don't think everyone's suited for it. Some people never leave their town. They never leave their city. Right. I may be totally okay with walking through the mountains of Nepal for a couple weeks. I may be okay wandering around India alone for 6 months. Like, who thought that was a good idea? Right. But that's not everybody. But I think it's the responsibility of people like you and me and other travelers to not only pierce the veil of these other countries and see them for what they are, but then come back and tell the honest truth about it. Yeah. Not so that we can make other countries look bad or so that we can make America look good, right? Not with an agenda, but just so we can get an honest picture of the world, because I don't think we get it through the TV.
Exactly. And you don't even get it through, unfortunately, what's partially bad is you don't even get it through, a 6-month study abroad. That's oftentimes where you're seeing like the really nice stuff. You have to spend more time there or have get out of the tourist bubble, as you said. But I certainly do think it is a responsibility to report back on the good and bad, because there certainly is that. And again, I really appreciate so many assets or facets of American life, I should say. There are other things that I know that, I certainly don't appreciate, and I kind of prefer more how they do things here, but at least I can see it with sober eyes, I suppose, instead of being deluded about, one is paradisal, because neither is. This is simply not true.
Yeah. It depends on what your values are, and you learn to make trade-offs, right?
Yep.
Like I can't, even a lot of people in California, let's talk pre-COVID, because COVID changed a lot of things around the world, and we don't have to talk about that. I suppose we can, but a lot of people in California were like, I really want to go live in New Zealand. Like that was we're going to escape to New Zealand in case the world ends was the common thing in California. I actually got to live in New Zealand for on and off for a couple of years. And there's a lot of really great things about New Zealand. The lifestyle down there is really great, but there are a lot of things as an American that are very difficult in a place like New Zealand. You can't find a country that looks more like America. Like if I just snap my fingers and bang, you're in New Zealand, you wouldn't actually know that you're in New Zealand, except for the cars driving on the side of the road. But as an American, again, it's the same question about entrepreneurship and, being driven and motivated and upfront and outspoken that just doesn't mesh well, with the Kiwi culture. It's not an insult to Kiwi culture. It's very laid back. They live on paradisal tropical islands, that are like tropical on the coast and like England on the interior. It's like, it's a wonderful place, but you have to really learn to okay, I'm going to accept a lower pace of life and all the diminished possibilities that includes, because I want to live at that pace and stay there. And that's a trade-off, because if you're entrepreneurial, highly motivated, driven, you want to be in a place like America, and your trade-off will be productization, commercialization, productivity and all that. And so you have to learn to make those trade-offs as a person.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about you being in Italy now, and what's taking you there and where you are in Italy and all of that.
Yes. So predominantly what's taken me here is my lovely wife. She is originally from Sicily, but we live now in the north of Italy. So about an hour or so northeast of Milan, and still Lombardy. So Lombardy to me isn't incredibly remarkable. I appreciate it. But all that being said, we live in a really nice little pocket, almost a little refuge from the city. The main city that we're at, we live about 10, 15 minutes by bus southeast of it. And we live almost adjacent to an airport where we're not in the flight path, which is nice. But if you just walk 10 minutes down the road, then you go into this very open area, and it's really cool. We took a walk. I mean, this was almost magical the other day. We took a walk right about the time the sun was, slowly setting. It's very different too, because we're at a far higher latitude. I suppose, here in Europe. I mean, more north in Canada, if you look at it just X's and X's on a map. But
it's not tropical.
No.
Mediterranean, that's the word.
Yeah, so the sun was setting beautifully, and we were just there, and we could look over this giant field of grass, and then you see the mountains in the distance just rising up. You see the church towers like in front of the mountains. To the right of us, there are some horses playing around, and we got to feed some of them. And then we're walking back, and this family of cats. This was bizarre, Will. It was like these cats came up to us, and they're the most dog-like cats I've ever seen. That one came up and started, rubbing on us, and then like two more, and then they all just like came out of the woodwork, and they're hanging out with us, and then we keep on walking, and the moon, because it was a full moon earlier this week. And the moon's coming up. It's almost like eye level, just giant across the sky, and right next to the mountains. And then we cross back over, and then we see a couple donkeys, and we go and say hi to them. Like it was really, really idyllic, honestly. And so I guess what I'm fortunate about here is that we live in a place where we have access to, the benefits of being in a city. But also just for leisure purposes, we can walk 10 minutes and go clear our mind. I'll go and if I need to take a break in the afternoon or just want some time to myself to kind of meditate, go light a pipe, stroll down this road, check out some of the horses, something like that. So that's really nice. And then obviously being an hour or so from Milan, Milan is essentially the hub that connects the rest of the country. So from there, can take a train to Rome, can take a train to Venice, really wherever you want. So that's very nice, just being located that way.
Mm-hmm. Are you, and you were mentioning something a little bit about the American Italian culture versus Italian culture versus tourist Italian culture. Like, let's talk about that, because I've only been to the Amalfi Coast in Italy, which is like a very small sliver of small of Italy.
All right. Well, I don't want to offend too many people, so I'll simply say
Are you listening, Italians?
Well, the Italian Americans more so. So technically, this is interesting because like my mom's family is technically Italian American. And so my great grandfather, I mean, he came over like on the boat and was essentially raised as like an orphan by the Irish policeman, strangely enough, in Boston at the time.
Sounds like a movie.
Yeah, no, I mean, like really, he even got drunk in a bar one night, got signed up for the military, and then like shipped out west to go hunt down Pancho Villa. I mean, it was really like crazy.
That's
stuff.
Awesome.
So yeah, actually kind of movie like. But anyways, we never had like anything super Italian related in my family, like not at all. And so I just kind of grew up completely neutral, almost no connection other than just understanding my family's lineage. But what I see a lot of the Italian Americans, unfortunately, I just, and look, I'm not like judging anyone because of their bloodline here. It's not like the Italian Americans are bad. Mm-hmm. But just what I've seen so much of
but
is
they
that
are.
Like, just unfortunately what I've seen a lot of is that they're very proud of being, Italian American and having that kind of Italian heritage, but it's almost become just a complete like caricature or something that you kind of do to show off, or you want to like feel unique by calling your grandmother, La Donna and just talking like that. But in reality, like completely detached from what anything real in Italy is like. And that, I mean, part of that, like, let's be honest, it's not their fault. Part of it's because, all right, well, when their grandparents came over, they obviously like they came from a very specific part of Italy, and Italy's changed a lot since then. There have been, migration patterns in Italy itself. And so I can understand some of that, but yeah, I guess it's almost kind of like, I just know certain individuals, and perhaps they've rubbed me the wrong way, where it's the pretense of it, like the pretentiousness of feeling that way, when in reality, like you have no connection. Like I have several other friends who, have fairly strong too, like lineages that are German or Polish, but they don't, they're not walking around like, oh, this and that and this and that, the other, Italian, like when in reality, like they're completely detached. I guess they're just more honest about it. they're more like, yeah, I mean, here's like this thing that we do, and it kind of comes from this tradition, but I'm not going to make you think that I'm like the most Italian thing in the world. When they can't even speak the language, like, come on. It's such a, if I can say this word, I mean, it really is, unfortunately, it's become a bastardization of a real culture. And that's unfortunate, but I feel like someone's got to say it. So
it's an affectation. It's not an authentic representation. It's an affectation, right?
Absolutely. And I think part of the reason too, in terms of the bigot, going back to what I said earlier of why Italian culture is so caricatured. So obviously, we were just talking about the subculture, which is kind of Italian Americans. But actually, more so than that, I think it's because Italy as itself, as a concept, really is a modern invention. So you'll see this most practically in the sense that Italy, before 1860, was not, before the mid 1800s, was not a country. It was a landmass. Italia was the Italian peninsula. It was not a nation. It had no pretensions to being a nation, no claim to that. It didn't even want to be. Italy itself is insanely fragmented. The different cultures that make it up, they're so diverse. I mean, literally like hundreds of different, ways of quote unquote being Italian. And so the Italians to this day, I mean, the regional differences are immense. And for that reason, I think foreigners cannot help but caricature Italy because there's no way of possibly actually tying together the complete diversity of what it is.
That's a great
and the
point.
Different nuances and again, true like cultural diversity that is here. They can only the only way that they can possibly try to tie it together in their mind is to create something that's homogenous and a caricature of the real thing.
It's so, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's all reduced down to literally the lowest common denominator, right? As opposed to, because you're right. Like I know that you're right, even though I haven't seen that much of Italy. Like Florence is very different from Rome, is very different from Milan, is very different from Venice, is very different from Amalfi. And so it's all these different regions. And the reason why I know this is in researching the Italian Renaissance for the Renaissance of Men, understanding where the Italian Renaissance came from, how it was all these different city-states kind of in competition with each other, and they didn't like each other. Like they weren't fans of each other, Not at all. And so now that all those same Italian city-states are now part of one nation, like forget it, right? And so yes, it makes sense that what are you going to take out of that as a national character? Well, there isn't one, but but except for this lowest common denominator caricature of that.
Yeah, I really think it's rather remarkable, especially to look back. Italian unification. To be honest, I'm rather sad that it happened.
Italian unification was a mistake.
It was. But it's really sad though to see like other places got away with it. France got away with it. Spain somehow cobbled together something coherent. Germany eventually unified. But Italy, it just feels the most forced. It really truly feels the most forced. And to see it on the ground and kind of the repercussions of it. I mean, think of it. It's only 160 years in the making, and think of the technology we have now. But even think of what life was like in the 90s. I mean, without the digital communication that we have now, these regional differences were even bigger. I mean, they persisted for a really, really, really long time.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just, again, Italy is so different. Every different aspect of it. I'm even talking about quote unquote Italy, but I can only speak to the parts of Italy that I know. I know that there are still so many other Italys that I haven't even gotten to experience or encounter in their full extent.
Right. And you touched on something interesting, which is that, as Americans, we have our unique founding mythologies, the Revolutionary War, right? The Civil War kind of also. And then I think the current American national identity is formed out of post-World War II. We're kind of still in that phase, right? So we have these founding mythologies, but other nations have theirs as well. And when I was living in New Zealand, like New Zealand and Australia didn't really start thinking of themselves as countries until after World War One, because of like the Gallipoli massacres. Like that was, for whatever reason, that moment was when Italy and New Zealand started thinking of themselves as countries, and not some big triumph. It was like our soldiers went overseas and got massacred in these battles. And that's kind of when the national identity of New Zealand, at least, and Australia too, kind of crystallized. And so Italy has its own founding mythology, which is unification, which I actually didn't know anything about, but it makes me kind of think that, maybe Mussolini had something to do with this too, of like, how are you?
Ooh,
yeah.
Sorry, just on Mussolini, actually, had it not been for Mussolini, I don't know if Italy would be together in one piece today. Like,
Amazing.
honestly, his form of politics consolidated a lot of the Italian state. I think he personally preserved it. This is not, in apology,
not endorsing
Benito Mussolini.
Exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
But if you look at what he did, I mean, the way that he strengthened the state itself and really brought it together, I honestly do not think that if that period in history had not transpired in Italy, that it would still be a country today. It's just, again, because it's this hodgepodge of regions that are very, very loosely tied together. It's miraculous that they even came together in the first place. If you read about the Italian unification, I mean, the history of it's so complex and so bizarre. That's why there aren't many like books on it. Right, French history is easy enough in the sense that you can actually follow a coherent A and B. But Italy has just been split by everyone, every ruling power at some point in the world. I mean, like, let's just give a brief rundown. The Greeks, the Carthaginians, the Romans, the Austrians, the French, the Bourbons, the Papal States, like all of these, the Spanish, everyone has had claim in Italy at some point. And the unification, I mean, the kind of the straws that they tie together to try to make this national myth, it's again very weak. I think it's one of the weaker ones in Europe for sure. And so they create their own heroes and try to hold them up. And even after World War II, there's definitely they created kind of more of their mythos, if you will, their founding mythology, because you have the people who were, against fascism and who actually like brought Italy together and kind of out of this thing, which in itself too is a complete like this is really funny because of how like Italy switched sides in the war. It's a complete propagandic myth in the sense that almost overnight, everyone in Italy went from being fascist to suddenly no one was. And so, it was very like arbitrary and it was, it's interesting. But anyways, all that to say, like, I don't know where I'm really going with this, but,
okay.
To go back to the point from earlier, it's just so incredibly diverse I mean, all of Europe is in ways that Americans don't really realize, just the regional differences in every country. Every single country has them. But I think Italy, out of any nation I've been in, certainly has the most that I've ever seen.
Yeah. And I think from an American perspective, it can be very difficult to appreciate that as rich and as important and as complicated as our founding mythology and history is, because there's the actual history, which the threads are too many to even number. And then the mythology is the grand narrative that's spun out of the history. So there's the mythology and the history. Every country has one of those, right? And it's so incredibly complicated, and it's almost impossible to comprehend unless you're even from there. Like, you have to grow up marinating in it and having it bake into your soul. Like Japan or Korea or China or whatever, pick a country, doesn't matter. They all have their own founding history and they all have their own founding mythology. And it's as important to them as it is to us. And it's probably as unintelligible to us as ours would be to them. It's like trying to understand a person. Like, you can't ever understand all the things that make a person a person. You could sit and talk for hours and never understand all the individual points, but there's still a person in front of you, and it's your responsibility to get to know them as best you can.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, again, nothing to add. You've said it perfectly.
So I guess you're here, you're over there, you're in Italy, and you're living overseas in Europe, in France and as well. And as you're there, you're marinating in all of this really formative culture that forms the backdrop of the United States founding mythology and history, even if it's not a huge part of it. And how did you get inspired, or when did you get inspired, or what inspired Rewire the West? Because I can imagine where you are. It's like, gosh, I got to start talking about this stuff, or you're being inspired by it as part of your background. Like, where did that come from?
That's a great question. Thanks for that. I think with Rewire the West, the mission of it is to help other people rediscover beauty, truth, and virtue, and specifically in Western culture. And the reason I do that is not from any sort of superiority complex of like the West is the best. It's not that, but what it is saying, like, I understand the power of culture and having roots. One thing I love about the French, and by the way, I don't know if I've told you this. I go back and forth, kind of depends what day you ask me, whether France is the best country in the world or the worst one. It really kind of depends on which day and my mood when you ask me that question. But
oh man,
it's a question I flip back and forth between. But one thing I love at the very least, or just have an immense respect for, is the French people and the connection to their culture and history, regardless of whether they know it or not many times. And so I've come to realize it, I suppose, perhaps travel has shown me this. It was like, really, America is born out of the old world. And regardless of what we want, regardless of if we like that, if we don't, like, it is a fact. Okay.
Yeah.
And I also believe that actually connecting with your culture, the roots and legacy of your culture, is what will ultimately make you most grounded, in the sense of, a tree has deep roots, and if you cut yourself off from those, you are doomed to die. I think we have to understand where we came from. And so anyways, I'm kind of beating around the bush here, perhaps. More specifically in the realm of beauty, truth, and virtue, I look back to the immensely great and beautiful contributions of Western culture. We were in a spot where, for hundreds of years, so much beauty, so much creativeness, inventiveness, really just magical stuff has arisen from this culture. And I feel like today, this is tying back into the roots thing, I feel like today, unfortunately, specifically in America, we are so often cut off from that. It's really sad. So what I want to do is I want to help people reconnect with that. And how that happened in my own life is that I have personally found a basis, in connecting to the land of, quote unquote, my forefathers, connecting to their art, to their ideas, to their narratives in the world that they walked in. I have found that immensely grounding in my own life. It's given me something to, in which to base myself, in which to to find a framing for the way that I view the world. One that allows me to be critical, actually, to not just kind of, accept blindly whatever this culture has presented, but, the classical liberal tradition that rose out of Europe. And by this, I mean liberal in its true etymological sense, which is liberating. The liberal arts were created to free man, to free man's mind, to allow man to engage with the world, to create in the image of his creator, to just experience and think critically and actually understand and grasp truth and its implications.
Yeah.
that is what I'm about. And that's what I found to benefit me immensely. It's what I found that these works of Western culture have benefited me immensely. And so simply Rewire the West is almost, to put it in the most simplistic way, it's me sharing that passion with others and hoping that it inspires them to also engage with these works that I do believe can be life-changing.
That's beautiful. Well said. Well said. And you again, you're saying so many really important things. Among them is that America is born out of the old world. Like we want to, I think there's some collective drive to, I don't know, forget that, ignore that. But when we do, we're talking about shadow, like light and dark sides of a country. Like I think the dark side, the shadow side of America comes out when we forget that, when we forget our own lineage. Now that doesn't mean that we need to bow down before our lineage and do like a form of ancestor worship, right? But I think to understand the intellectual, artistic, cultural, even spiritual traditions of Europe and how they informed the American project, I think can bring us back to some notion of self that isn't completely corporatized, that isn't completely productivity driven, and that brings some soul back into America without having to turn us into Europe.
Yeah. Yes. And to add to that as well, I'll say that a big thing that got me started on, looking to the beauty that came out of Western culture was simply because of its longevity. It has stayed around for so long, and it does so for a reason. It's not arbitrary. These works have stood the test of time for a reason, because they allow us to stand the test of time, because they resonate with deep human truths. And so what we have, the art that we can look to from the old world, it's been mulling in these things that it's contemplating the human condition far longer than America's roots, as a nation has ever done.
Yeah.
And so it's like, why bother, for example, engaging with this contemporary culture that's trying to figure things out? It's almost trying to build things from scratch, when I can go to things that are thousands of years old, hundreds of years old, a couple centuries old, that they have. I know that they're time proven, and I know that they're going to resonate with me, and I know that they're going to do so because they've done so for millions of people before me. Mm-hmm. It's like I just got so tired, I guess, of almost wasting my time with contemporary media, entertainment, culture, what have you, that I just said, I want to embrace things that are good, that are good for me, and that I don't have to worry about, like, is this going to be garbage or whatnot? And the work that's done on my soul has been immense.
So let's talk about Western culture. Like, let's talk about some of the earliest roots of Western culture, because this term gets thrown around a lot, and and I think something gets lost in the fog of like, what is Western culture? Like, I know it's an enormous question, so you don't need to do a dissertation like we both could, but like where do you see Western culture beginning as sort of breaking off from the cultures that preceded it? Like just a rough date, and some significant moments, so at least we can have a basis of understanding this is the foundation of it, and then we can move forward from there.
Yeah. Well, I'd put a couple breaks. Obviously, if you want to go down to classical antiquity, then I think that's where you get into the Greco-Roman world. But what is immensely important to note is that Christendom changed all of that. That the Greco-Roman world provided the philosophical foundations, the intellectual foundations for which we understand the world. But in terms of the ethical and moral outlook, Christianity changed all of that. So if you want to trace the roots back to almost phase one being Greco-Roman classical antiquity, and then I would actually point to the Middle Ages. But even before that, I really love the medieval world. I think, I don't know why it was ever called the Dark Ages. I think it's
because of the Enlightenment.
Yeah, no, it's full of luminosity, the medieval world, in many senses. But really, Christianity changed the game. And I believe it's G.K. Chesterton who said, Europe is the faith and the faith is Europe. And that sounds on face value perhaps rather provocative. He's not saying that to the exclusion of the whole rest of the world, but what he means by that, if I'm understanding him correctly, is that Europe, as we know it today, grew out of Christendom, and Christianity's impact is it cannot be more. It just simply can't be overstated. It's impossible to do so. Now, where I felt like I saw this very impactfully, to perhaps give an example of what I mean, is that when I was in Rome this past summer and I saw the Colosseum, and understanding what we would call modern days, the atrocities that occurred in those Colosseums, and to think of how that was so deeply ingrained in the worldview and the day-to-day life of the entire populace, and how very, very quickly, too, all of that changed, and it completely flipped on its head. And suddenly every human life was worthy of, it was dignified for the sense that it was human life, a radical Christian ideal that was, that changed the entire way that the European mind started to conceive of things morally and ethically. And now, to fast forward a bit, like going down the rest of European history, obviously atrocities have occurred. This is not to whitewash any of that or not to pretend like they don't exist.
These both things can be equally true.
Exactly. I would say, I guess, to try to steer this shit back to your original question,
take it wherever, man.
What would you call the West? I would say once we have the intersection of both the ethical and moral considerations of Christianity coming into mixing with the philosophical framework of Greco-Roman antiquity.
That's fantastic. That's a fantastic answer, actually. Yeah, I like that, because it puts the two halves of something together that I hadn't synthesized before. Because you're right, it is the level of moral evolution called upon by Christianity once you start infusing that into the richness of, again, Greco-Roman culture, which essentially was European culture in many ways at that stage. Then, yeah, that's where the seed of Western culture was planted and had a flowering. About the atrocity thing, I just want to go back to that for a second. One of the things that we don't hear about in America is that those level of atrocities have happened all over the world.
They have
Africa, Asia, Oceania, South America, like genocide, murder, destruction, part of human history, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't and so we're led to believe that, and I'll push on this in a second. We're led to believe that the atrocities of the West are the worst atrocities to ever happen in human history, and we're so much worse than everyone else. Shame on us, terrible, kneel, bow to the rest of the world. Okay, now here's what's interesting. I think the only reason that case has any purchase on our hearts is because Christianity calls us to a higher moral standard than the rest of the world, right?
It is. It's why, I mean, you're really preaching to the choir about this, but
Sweet.
just to, because I couldn't think more similarly. Yes, the thing that is unique about the Western world is because it has, so Christianity, essentially what it did is it provided a framework to where you could say, this has gone too far. Okay. Mm-hmm. It's essentially a safety valve. And now this is not to say that people have abused Christianity, like they've abused every faith, that's ever been on the planet, to
even Buddhism,
power and all these stuff. But you're right. It is the moral compass implanted that by Christianity that tells you that there's an abuse occurring. Yeah. It's what tells you that, people act like the elimination of slavery is like, it almost doesn't count for anything because we were doing it.
Right.
No one else did that. That's right. Immensely important.
Yep.
Immensely important. The British anti-slavery campaign was gigantic. People don't even understand, they were punishing their own businesses. They were sending people out to go patrol. Like, it was a whole endeavor. People have no clue how big the scale of this was. And it was undertaken. That whole movement was driven by Christian abolitionists.
Yep.
In the British Parliament.
Yep.
And again, like all this stuff has always happened. Any people in power would commit atrocities the same way that they were committed on behalf of, quote unquote, Western culture. But again, what we have, I don't want to say to our credit, because I'm not like taking this as,
Right.
oh, like this is something that makes me better. But just to put it all in perspective, I mean, the West is certainly not by any extent uniquely evil. I think, to put it that simply.
Yes.
And perhaps I'd even posit that it has things that actually bring about unique attributions of good into the world. And that's what comes from the Christian framework.
I agree. I mean, there was the Muslim Arab slave trade, Muslim slave trade was so much more massive than the transatlantic slave trade. And there was no abolition movement, right? Mm-hmm. Like, this is something, and I think it's because Christianity lives so deeply, let's say, in our bones and in our culture, that the guilt of the times when we culturally haven't lived up to those standards, is now getting used against us culturally. Yeah. It's like, oh, we should have been so much better. Now there's some, like, we is such a nebulous term. Like, hey, I wasn't around back then. Like, if I were there, I probably would have said something, because I'd say something today. But it lives within us that we have this moral framework, and it's almost like taking Christianity for granted. Like it's kind of strange, because if Christianity weren't true, I'm going to try and kick my way around this. If Christianity weren't true, why does any of it matter? Oh, we're such an awful nation, awful people, Westerners. We should feel so guilty and ashamed. Why? Right? Because we're supposed to do better. But Christianity is false, that applies an objective moral law. Well, if that Christianity is false, there's no objective moral law. Who cares? It's like taking our own weapon, using our own goodness against us. And then we buy it and forget to see that, like, wait a minute, this sword of goodness, this is my sword, right? It's kind of, if any of that makes sense.
It does. And to show it, I mean, excuse me, from another point of view, Tom Holland, who's a historian, a really good historian, pretty atheist, perhaps agnostic, but, an admitted atheist, wrote a book called Dominion, which is about essentially how the Christian worldview shaped the West. Mm-hmm. And he said, before going into this, like, I almost thought I, found a lot of affinity with my Greco-Roman, kind of inheritance and those ancestors and whatnot. But he said, now that I look at it, when I look at my default view, so almost like culturally, the default operating system or programming through which I view the world, it is Christian. It is fundamentally Christian. He researched this whole book and said it's not Greco-Roman. It's Christian.
Yeah.
And I mean, the whole, read however many hundreds of pages it is that where he kind of walks through why that is so. But every Westerner today, any claim to morality or ethics that they make is rooted in a Christian worldview, whether or not they know that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You're not rooting in a Greco-Roman, you're not talking about Zeus. You're not talking about Jupiter. Like, we're not. I've met,
but it's not even that. Like, it's the simple fact to say that all human life is dignified.
Oh, okay.
That is an incredible statement, especially coming from what it came out of, because infanticide in cultures before was incredible. Mm-hmm. The weak had no value. The old, the young had drastically less value. Mm-hmm. It was not taken for granted that all life was dignified. Mm-hmm. Not by any means. By any means. It's completely radical, and not enough people realize it.
Yeah, when you start looking into the history of, for example, a lot of the native cultures of North and South America, like human sacrifice, just part of it. Like the Aztec ceremonies, like ripping people's hearts out on altars, like that's just what they did. Now that's not a total incrimination of everything, but it's just an understanding of like the valuation of a human life. Now that doesn't mean that all of Europe has valued human life well since then, but that value is sitting there as a standard that we're being called to, whether or not we choose to adhere to it. That value, like a North Star being there, that all human life is intrinsically valuable. That's a massive innovation. And not only that, not all human life, but especially the poor, especially the weak, especially the young. Like they have equal value to kings. That from the perspective of God, a king is as valuable as a pauper. Like
I mean, that's radical.
No wonder kings hate Christianity, right?
Yeah, yeah, it is. It is truly radical. I guess to steer this back a little bit, just to the actual works themselves that have come out of Western culture, in terms of literature and particularly music, which I also speak about a lot. Is that these help pick up on so many of these human aspects. Like they can tap into a type of beauty that we don't actively get in everyday life, and they attest to these very things that we're talking about. These very powerful spiritual but also concrete realities of what life actually is like, and they allow you to understand it in a different way. I think that's one of the biggest things about turning to these works and looking to them for guidance, is that they allow you to comprehend that on a different level. It's the same way where you, for example, could read all day long about doing a push-up. You could get the best books about it. You could watch the best videos on it, and you can understand it conceptually. But until you actually go and do the work, the physical embodied experience of doing a push-up, you don't get it. You don't understand what it's like. And art, I think at its best, visual, musical, literary, it helps you step into that experience and to express it in ways that everyday life is incapable of doing.
And this is kind of what informs the Rewire the West project. Well, that actually gets me, like, I've never actually thought, is like, why is it called Rewire the West? What's up with the verb? Like, that's not revive the West. It's not reform the West. It's not resurrect the West. It's rewire the West. Why that particular, aside from the fact that it kind of rolls off the tongue?
Yeah. Well, I definitely like the, iams in there. So the meter, rewire the West, you can kind of say it like that. Yeah. But no, I think the actual reason that I chose rewire is because it purposefully has a double sense of ambiguity. So it's rewire in one sense, that is the quote unquote resurrect, like return to what was there, rewire it again in the same way. But it's also a rewiring, which can also imply like, innovation and moving forward and doing it a little bit differently, because I didn't want it to be archaic and simply resurrect the past, and have nothing. It's a rewiring. It's a tapping into the past in order to actually be able to move forward into the future. And I believe we do that by getting in more alignment with what has come before, allowing works of true beauty to change us, and then seeing how that shapes how we move going forward.
So when did you actually start Rewire the West? Maybe a year or so ago, or
2021, January 2021.
Oh wow! So
posted my first video on YouTube in April.
Okay, and then so as you're heading late, that's amazing actually, because that's right around the same time I started the Renaissance of Ben, which was around October of 2020. So like so you would have been thinking about it at the same time I was. I mean, there was so much flowering of creative thought about the West and masculinity all going on at that particular season. It's actually like if you follow Arthur Dane, Blood and Rain, his podcast and everything he does started back then, and so many content creators on Instagram. That was a really special moment, I think, that was going on for a lot of us, now that I think about it.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you mention that, because I know, so obviously if I started in the new year of 2021, those ideas have been going through my mind in mid to late 2020. And a large part of that was, did we have the elections that year? I believe so. It was COVID and elections.
It was sort of an election, but yeah.
COVID and elections. And I remember specifically that part of it, I just didn't want to have, like, I was just tired of it and I wanted a refuge from it all. And I picked up Shakespeare and read what is now, for many reasons, one of my favorite plays by him, Much Ado About Nothing, and fell in love. I mean, I had obviously, been familiar with Shakespeare's work before that, but I reconnected with something that was grand, that was lovely, that inspired my soul and gave me, again, it was a balm to BALM to the fiery and kind of, I don't even know what to kind of say there. Just almost like the cheese grater that is modern culture and political dialogue. Dialogue, if you can even, if it's dignified to call
shouting.
it that. Yes. But that's what the cheese grater analogy is kind of what I'm trying to get at, because that's what it feels like. And it felt like a balm to that, something that could just soothe it over and be a refuge. And in that, what I realized is that it's not these works necessarily in particular in and of themselves. What it actually is, it's beauty, and beauty is embodied in these works, but it is beauty itself, which is a refuge from all of this stuff. And so, to kind of continue with where I'm just going with this all, I talk a lot about beauty on the channel, and people get infuriated by it if you say, here's a piece of work that's better than something else. And they say, well, everything is like, first of all, it's all relative. And secondly, how can you say this is better than something else? I'm saying, and I've almost called this thing, I've tried terming it populist elitism, which is saying that you can be elite for a populist reason. And what I mean by this, to put it most practically, is that people deserve great beauty. They deserve great beauty. They are actually being robbed and cheated every day that you try to pass off this modern garbage as nutritive. Every day that you try to pass it off as normal, or, oh, you should like this, or, oh, it's good for you. No, it's crap. And it's you who are elitist, because even your pretentious, like the pretensions you have to think that this is art in the first place, are insanely narcissistic and elitist. But furthermore than that, what people actually need is beauty in their life, because beauty serves as a refuge from all the crap in their life. They don't need more ugliness in their life. I hear that too. Well, it's just art that reflects real life. Real life is ugly. It's like, well, yes, it is. So what are you going to do? You're just going to live in ugliness?
Yeah.
That's no solution. No, you want to look to things that actually inspire you, that like push you across. And perhaps it's because I think part of the thing, this is all coming out of the West that is so privileged. And so perhaps people don't realize this, but if you work in background, like in milieu that are poor or just not as prosperous, they don't have access to these opportunities. You see how they love beauty. They're not spending time with these crap postmodern pieces of quote unquote art. They're not wasting time with that because it doesn't do anything for them. They're looking to real beauty. And so actually I bring this all full circle, like this populist elitist ideal is to say, like, people need beauty. That's why I'm so darn passionate about it. It's not because I'm trying to say, oh, look at me, I can appreciate classical music. It's not that. It's saying that actually you are impoverished, whether you know it or not, by thinking that contemporary pop music is, the extent of all that there is, essentially. Like you are being force fed M&Ms in McDonald's and being told that it's a 4-star, a 3 Michelin star restaurant meal. You're being told that it's exquisite, and what it is it's garbage. And actually, you deserve something that's far better. You deserve something that's actually nutritive. That's something that you're actually going to love. You deserve to sit down at a banquet table, and have the most exquisite and wonderful, delicious meal of your life. And that is what these works can offer you.
Yeah, you did a great video on your channel called "Pop is Porn," and it's a great exploration of that. I think that what we're given today in terms of like what my quote unquote art is so denatured and so degraded and so hyper simplified, and that's true in cinema. It's true in music. I would hesitate to even call it cinema. It's just flicks at this point, right? In music, people don't go to the theater anymore. They don't go to the symphony anymore. It's basically just TV, Netflix series, right? And pop music and, Marvel. And so,
don't get me started on Marvel.
That's for sure.
Garbage.
Yeah. And so I think people, they have their taste buds for beauty have been basically just like sandpapered off, right? And so you show them something that's truly beautiful, or play it for them, or whatever. It's like they can't even really engage with it because they've never experienced it. It's so far beyond their experience. And one of the things that I've been saying lately is that the degradation of beauty in culture has had a particular impact on men and women, because men thirst for beauty. I'm sure women do too, but since this is a podcast about men thirst for beauty. And if we can't find it in our culture, we go looking for it the only places that we know, which is in nature, which is fine, right? But that's a particular kind of beauty, right? We're looking for human scale beauty. And so the only place that we have to go looking for it is in women. And so we place our entire hunger and thirst for beauty squarely on the shoulders of women who were never meant to contain all of it to begin with. And so it burdens our relationship, our romantic relationships, with men's need for beauty that women can never fulfill, because we're supposed to be getting it from our culture that denies it to us. Right. Yeah. And so that's why I think what you're doing is so important, because we have to recultivate our taste buds for beauty so that we can begin getting it on demand. Put on a symphony, enjoy. Congratulations, you have your beauty for the day.
Excuse me. I think what you say about the taste buds is incredibly spot on, because what I know for a fact is that the part of the difficulty is that these things are not easy to engage with. But you don't expect anything good. You wouldn't want it to be immediately accessible to you the first time you have it. I mean, I could give a dozen examples of this. Let me just take one from, my experience in France. French cuisine, as you might know, it has very few times any extreme flavor. What it is it's very subtle and very nuanced. And so the sauces that they use, the food combinations, it all goes together in a very particular way. And coming from America, for example, where our sugary foods are very, very, very sugary, our fat foods are very, very fat and salty. Like we kind of get these flavor bursts that come out. And the first time that you taste something like French food, it might feel bland because you don't get it. But once you start to have more of it and actually cultivate literally like your taste buds and your palate for it, you start to get the different notes and the different tastes and the different spices that are in there. The same thing could be said of something like a fine whiskey. The first time that you have a nice whiskey, it might just completely blow your nose off because you don't even have any faculties to process the flavors that you have. But if you spend enough time getting to know Scotch, for example, then you can start to appreciate the different notes that are in there, the different kind of peatiness, how it was maybe roasted, kind of the salt, like was it from an island, where was it from? You can start to get different essences of these. And so the same exact thing happens with great art. And I think this is part of the challenge for a lot of people, is that they go to it and they're like, oh, well, I just don't get it, or I don't have the patience for it. Or perhaps even they say it wasn't good, because think about it. If the only thing I'm used to is McDonald's fries, which are very tasty and addicting, then the second I have something that's like a real, home cut, really good, like sweet potato fry, I might not like it at all. I know I'm kind of giving silly examples at this point, but
you're from North Carolina,
but it really
man,
is like the same thing with great music, great literature. It's like you have to spend time with it. And this is what people up until perhaps like mid 20th century or so, in the West, at least, there was a good habit of this, of generations teaching the next generation, regardless of whether they liked it or not at the moment. They would teach them things kind of while they were younger, and then those people would come to grow up and actually like develop the taste. So they kind of taught them, like, hey, you're going to sit down with this whether you like it or not, and eventually like you're going to develop the taste for it. And so people would develop taste, and they would understand that the more time you spend with classical music, for example, the more you get out of it. I mean, even on my own journey, I've tried to kind of encourage others by talking about my own, and even the stuff that like I'm able to appreciate now and enjoy now is stuff that I wouldn't have been able to get 2 years ago, not even one. And that's just, my own personal thing. Someone who feels like, all right, I have a good understanding of this stuff. I have a good knowledge base of it, but I'm still completely learning more and more, and I get more and more out of it each time. It's the simple truth. The more time you spend with it, the more that you get out of it.
You make a really good point about a lot of that, but French food especially. Like the joke in American movies, if you've seen, is that like when the American character goes to like a French restaurant for the first time, what happens? They bring out a plate of food and there's this little dime size or quarter size morsel on there, and the American's like, where's the food? Because they're expecting some big massive steak or burger or whatever. But the thing is, when you go to a restaurant like that, and they're hard to, you can find them. They do exist. They're expensive. Like they're very, very expensive, but there's a reason. I remember when I was living in New Zealand, I went to a restaurant like that called Clooney. And, of course the interior experience of that was incredible. The decor, the ambiance, the environment was amazing. All the portions were what we might call very, very small. There was nothing like ribeye steak size, but the food was so expertly prepared. Was the flavor and the texture and the nuance and the subtlety and the combinations of different elements was so expertly prepared, even though the quantity of food wasn't very much, especially over the 3-hour experience, because they would, everything's timed, right? So it's like you have some time to eat this, and then they bring you the after course kind of drink and you have that, and then 15 minutes go by and then they bring you the next thing so your taste buds can reset. Like it's this expertly curated journey through the experience of flavor and texture. By the end of that 3 hours, though the quantity of food was not a lot, I was exhausted. I was literally exhausted. We went back to the hotel room. My girlfriend and I, we had planned to go out to like a bar or something afterwards. We were exhausted because the experience of flavor and texture was so rich and so powerful. Like we didn't want to eat anymore. Like if you can imagine your whole I can't eat anymore because the sense, pleasure, texture experience has been so overwhelming that I'm like, I'm good. I'm going to go back. I'm going to go sleep now. And so you can't taste the food with your eyes. You can't experience the food with your eyes, which Americans are likely to do. You have to take it in, and then your eyes get opened and then your whole world changes. And you don't do this every week. You do this once a year for a special occasion. Right. But we get lost in this. No, I want the 20-ounce ribeye steak. Like, well, there's other ways of enjoying food other than that. And this applies to art as well.
I love that example. And I think too, it's part of what's really nice about that meal that you had is that actually the meal becomes something more valuable than the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
In the sense that 3 hours, you're certainly not spending 3 hours eating. So it's not about the utilitarian consumption of food. It transcends and becomes more about the experience, the decor, the conversation, the presentation of the meal. Like it all evolves into something far bigger and something more meaningful. Again, it's a night that you're bringing up right now, not necessarily just because of the food, but because of the experience that you had.
I kept the
menu.
I would
posit that good art allows you to do just that. Even actually to say the experience of going out to a restaurant. Why bother going to a restaurant in the first place? It's not quote unquote real life. It's not quote unquote is it escapism? No, you don't. This is the whole thing of people being like, well, are you just going into things that don't exist? Like the world isn't classical music and opera and Lord of the Rings. It's like, well, why do you go to a restaurant? Because specifically because you want a nice break that's restorative, that's refreshing, that you feel good after going to. Like you want that. And that is what these things provide in the first place. That's why they're worthwhile.
Yeah, there's nothing escapist about an artistically prepared meal at all. It's the opposite of escapist, right? Like you're not, first of all, escapism, people say like it's a bad thing. Like let's just stipulate, okay, like escapism is a bad thing. Reading Lord of the Rings is a bad thing. Why? I don't know. Who knows? But even if it were, when you go to, it's one thing to listen to a classical music CD on your Bose speaker when you're puttering around the house or cleaning. It's another thing to go to the symphony, or it's another thing to go to the theater. There's nothing escapist about that at all because it's embodied. Like when you're doing something embodied, how could it possibly be escape? What are you escaping from? And so so food, like it just takes you so far into yourself and your own experience of yourself. It's just like, I'm just getting destroyed by this chef. What is this person in the kitchen doing? They've ruined me. I can't even see them and I'm wrecked. Like that's not escapist at all. And only by slandering it as escapism can you possibly drive people away, from this experience of themselves. Yeah. It's warfare. I don't know how else to put it. It's propaganda. Yeah. It's anti-human propaganda.
Yeah. Two brief notes on that. The first is that Roger Scruton has a lovely quote which says, "Consolation in imaginary things is not imaginary consolation."
Oh, Scruton's great. Yeah.
I think it's very wise, very concise and wise summation. I would also say that actually what you said, the difference between simply consuming something, even if you get restaurant style food, but you order it and have it at your house, it's not the same. Even if you listen to an orchestra on CD on your Bose speaker, it's not the same. Yeah. And the reason is because what you're experiencing is it becomes, once again, more than the sum of its parts when it is embodied, because the experience becomes so much more all-encompassing. So, for example, if I go to see an opera, where it differs from me watching it on my TV, is that I'll use what I would do in London, for example. I'd get back from work, kind of throw off my stuff, maybe change real fast. I'd go out. I'd walk 45 minutes through London to arrive to Covent Garden. I'd get there. Maybe I would meet a friend. I'd walk through the garden, through this beautiful architecture, like get to see all this stuff. I'd meet a friend there, maybe have a drink before the show. I'd go and have a call with my then girlfriend at the time. Then while sitting and just taking in the ambiance, and just kind of relaxing. And then they'd start ringing the bell. It's like, all right, you go up the stairs. They're going to sit down. You're going to do this. Maybe at the interval, you're having a conversation with someone you met. Like it becomes this whole 4 to 5 hour thing. And then, by the way, like the walk back at night, you walk through the city. It has a different life. You get to reflect on what you've seen. Like the experience itself allows the art to resonate with you on such a deeper level because you process it in so many more ways. It's embodied in so many more different ways, every aspect of the evening. And so it's not simply the 3-hour quote unquote consumption of an opera. What it is,
right.
It's the actual 6 hour or so, 6 to 7 hours, perhaps overall experience from leaving your door and going back.
Oh, I got a couple of things I want to say in response to that. So the first thing is that, and the beautiful thing about a live artistic performance is that there's always a component of being on the edge of your seat because the performers, you hope that they can screw up, but the slightest mistake, you know what I mean? It's like you feel the impact of it versus going to a sports game where it's like mistakes are just kind of part of it. Obviously, you don't want the top performers to make a big mistake at a crucial moment at the end of the game, but it's only when the tension is most heightened that you feel that. Like, someone misses a 3-pointer at the end, at the start of halftime or whatever. Big deal. You got a whole other half. But like, if someone, God forbid, knock on wood, a top level performer screws up just a little bit, like an opera singer's voice cracks or something like that, you like, that's not supposed to happen. And that tension of being there, of being in the moment, like I'm so lost in this right now. And the slightest touch on it would take me out of this moment of transcendence. That's part of the joy of a live performance that you can't get in a CD because a CD is already perfect. Like no one's going to put out a CD. They're going to take it again until they get it right.
Yeah. I touched on this point in one video. I think it was called "Why Opera is Based AF," and that was one of my points.
Titles are so good.
Yeah, that was one of my points. Is that you're there, and the sheer professionalism and expertise of this performers is amazing. Because you're right, like a finished movie, they could have done something in 100 takes. A finished CD, the same exact thing. But when you're really there, it's on the edge of a knife. And it's miraculous. I mean, it really is incredible how often they get it right. And that's not because it's easy. It's because it really speaks to human excellence. I love human excellence in whatever form, whether it's someone being a chef, being a rock climber, being a singer, whatever it is, athletes, to see them perform at the pinnacle of human performance is that in itself is exciting. It's gratifying because it's actually, I would say, if you want to put a spiritual backdrop to it, it's getting a glimpse at the potential of God's creation. Where what we see on earth doesn't even actually tap into a fraction of 1% of that, but it gets closer than what you might see in every day. And so you get there, and not only are you taking in this work, but every single performer, I mean, it's insane. Like an opera, I'll keep going back to this. You could have at least 50 people in the orchestra. Think of that. All these people who have dedicated their lives, every single individual in the orchestra alone has dedicated his or her life to becoming the best performer that they can.
Yes.
That is remarkable.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really special to see.
I think I said that in one of the videos that I did. I'm pretty sure, and we'll go to those later, but like the idea that any one performer, like take the London Symphony Orchestra, just as an example. You take the third chair violin player in the London Symphony Orchestra, right? And you put them in your living room, just you and them, and let them play for you. They will make you weep in minutes. That's how incredible. And they're the third chair. Like, they're not even the soloist. They're not even the second. They're the third chair. And the level of collective perfection that is embodied in an orchestra at that level, it's impossible to imagine. And the reason why it's impossible to imagine is that they're all so good and it fits together as one seamless whole that it's like it's incomprehensible. Like the beauty blends into this tapestry of incredibleness that you can't pick out any one individual. And yet that's the bed that the soloist sits on to do what they're doing. So while we're fixated on the soloist, all these other performers are masterful at an incomprehensible level, and that we're fixated on the soloist that we lose sense of the context and we almost take it for granted. But when you zoom in on that level, it's like, I would love if there's any third chair London Symphony Orchestra violinist listening right now, you're welcome to come over and play for me anytime. That experience is special.
It really is. I think you hit the nail on the head. There's one thought that came to me while you were speaking about that. Part of what's so beautiful about it too is that true excellence is, I mean, first of all, it takes a lifetime of dedication and effort and expertise to get to where they can and to perform professionally on that level. But furthermore, the best in the game, they go one step further and they make it look easy. That's where the true beauty of it is. I was watching a ballet this past weekend with my wife. She obviously loves me very much because she tolerates me, sitting down on the TV and watching a ballet.
Watching ballet on TV.
We were observing this with I have a subscription.
Not now, honey. The ballet is on.
The literally like the only subscription I have is to Marquee TV, which is like Shakespeare, opera, ballet, classical music. It's super. I mean, for me, it's perfect.
This is a streaming network.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
You might inspire
don't
me
have
to plug
Netflix, but I have that. Yeah.
You might inspire me to plug my TV back in.
There you go. So anyways, we were watching this and just, I mean, the first ballerina, we were just watching what she was doing. And at one point I just like completely lost it because she did something on stage. I went, what in the world? Yeah. Because I knew, I mean, first of all, I say I know, but I probably only know a fraction of quote unquote knowing, in its full sense of how difficult it was what she was doing. But I could see she did a move and I was just like, that is insanely difficult.
Yep.
But what was remarkable about it is that she made it look like it was the easiest thing in the world.
Effortless, like a feather. Yes.
And you see Horowitz do the same thing when he performs Mozart. I love this. There's this one, perhaps on YouTube, you can find a recording of him performing Mozart's 23rd Piano Concerto. And you have the symphony kind of around him playing, and then he'll go into his piano things. And he's just remarkably casual. And he'll kind of like throw his hands in the air and just do this. And then, his part's coming up. All right. He just kind of, lackadaisically drops on the piano and then starts, playing Mozart and just crushing it. to a level that you and I could only dream of. And it's just entertaining to watch. He's not doing it in a show-offy way by any means. It's just, that this is embodied excellence. And I think I've always said that I love human excellence, but now that we're kind of digging into it more, I think it is truly because of what I said earlier, is because it allows you to see a potential of – it allows you to see a glimpse of the full potentiality that is God's creation and just the beauty of that.
Mm-hmm. I went to see Jordan Peterson in concert, quote unquote, on Jordan Peterson live on, I guess it was this past Monday night. So just 5 or 6 days ago. And my friends and I were going, and we're like, does he just go on at 7:30? Like, what happens? And it's like, no, there must be someone to warm up the crowd. Like, you can't just have Jordan Peterson walk on stage cold. So we're trying to figure out what if there is going to be an opening act, what is the opening act going to be? And I was surprised because it was a solo classical guitar player, right?
Oh, wow.
And finger style classical guitar. And and I was watching him and listening to him perform, and the music that was pouring out of this instrument was incredible. It's just like gushing forward with this guy's 2 hands. Like, how is he playing multiple melodies and bass lines with 10 fingers? And he disappeared, and the fact that it was coming from a single instrument disappeared, and it was just music coming from this point on stage. And it's that moment of transparency, like you're talking about David Horowitz. It's that the player has disappeared and the instrument has disappeared, and music seems to be coming from out of nowhere. Like, you see the person and you see the instrument, and it's like they have something to do with what I'm experiencing, but what I'm experiencing is so far beyond these objects. And that's the beauty of what people can experience. And so for a moment, I want to explore the idea that it seems at some point, probably in the past 60 or 80 or so years, that these very human artistic experiences of art have become elitist. And to the point where, to talk about this in this way, like, I can imagine a lot of people are listening like, wow, I've never thought of art that way before, because art is some experience that's been separated from them. That's like, oh no, this is for people with lots of money and lots of education and lots of class and lots of style. And you don't have access to that, and you can't understand it anyway. And that seems like something that's been going on for at least longer than my lifetime almost. Right. And so I want to talk about this because I think maybe some of what you're trying to do with Rewiring the West is rewire the experience of art and beauty back into not just Western culture, but the people, and let them know that this is part of their inheritance.
Mm-hmm. It always has been, it always is, and it always will be. It's made for them. Mm-hmm. That's who it's made for. It's made for people. It's made for you and me. It is these magical moments that even earlier this week, I took a moment just to journal a little bit, reflect. And before I did so, I listened to the prelude of Lohengrin, Act 1 by Wagner. And if you haven't heard it, it's magical. The first time, I'll tell you about the first time I heard it, actually. I was in my flat in London, and it was late at night. I was going to brush my teeth, and for whatever reason, I said, I want to listen to some music while I brush my teeth. So I pull up. I was like, oh, what's something by Wagner? And I put this on.
I brushed my teeth to Wagner.
Yeah, but the strings start up, and within the first 5 seconds, I was hypnotized. I said, whoa, I can't. And I literally just like a zombie, put my toothbrush down, backed up, sat on my couch, and just sat there for the next 11 minutes, listened to it, completely hypnotized. And what it evokes, I can't tell you. I can't tell you what it evokes. It's something that you have to experience for yourself. But the reason I'm going down this is to tie it back to what I was doing with journaling. It allowed me to enter into, when I listened to it earlier this week, it allowed me to enter into a headspace and a realm of gratitude and almost a removed observance of my life, in a sense, just to step back and almost get in touch with what actually matters. And I felt immensely grateful, immensely at peace, immensely just, wow, so aware of the many graces in my life, all undeserved. All of those, I was brought into this undescribable awareness of it all. Okay, and that was for me. Like that was it was a gift to me. And in the same way that it was a gift to me, it can be a gift to you. It can be a gift to whoever is listening to this. It is a gift for you. It is a gift for you to take that, to be able to tap into the rich tapestry that is life, the rich tapestry that is the everyday moments, and to see them with this almost a sobering, but not only sobering, at times also beautifully enhancing perspective, just to see it for what it is and appreciate it. And so to bring this back to what you said of making it for the people, I think that's exactly who it's for. It's always been for people, whether others have tried to co-opt it or not is almost beside the point, because the fact of the matter is that right now it is within your grasp. All of these works, they're in the public domain. They're easily accessible anywhere.
Yeah.
Whether it's musical, literary, artistic, they are for you. They're begging you to interact with them, in the sense that they have so much knowledge and wisdom that they can imbue to you, if only you'll reach out and invite it to do so.
I agree. Like when I was researching Hamlet for my Hamlet podcast, which I'm very proud of, I'll link that in the show notes. Probably a lot of people have heard it who are listening, and everything that we're talking about, by the way, or, Tom Holland, why opera is based, AF, Papa's Porn, all this stuff. These will all be linked in the show notes. So for anyone who wants to explore deeply, I'll make sure this is all embedded in there. But when I was researching Hamlet, I realized that, like, Shakespeare, all of his plays, they were written for the public. Like, just average people would walk in and listen to Shakespeare. It was entertainment. Like, oh, the new Shakespeare play is on. In the same, like, not exactly the same, but in the same way, like the new big blockbuster movie comes out. Not even blockbuster, really. It's like, Shakespeare's got a new play out. What are you doing tonight? Let's go check out Shakespeare. And it's like, these people weren't educated. Most of the people listening in the theater couldn't read. Like, the reason why they had those boxes was because that's where the royalty or the elites or the wealthy would sit, and everyone else was just kind of down on the floor standing. But they're
called the groundlings for a reason. The groundlings.
Exactly. Like, they were not wealthy, they were not educated, but they would go and listen to Shakespeare. And now you fast forward 500 years and it's like, oh, sorry, no, you have to go to school to enjoy Shakespeare. We're so intelligent now. You have to go to school to enjoy the thing that, that even average people enjoyed weekly. And it's this profound, yet another inversion. It's this profound inversion of values where it's like, we've been deprived of stuff. And it's kind of a testament to, I mean, yes, okay, there's a linguistic component that Shakespeare wrote in a language that we don't speak, right? Or in a linguistic style that we don't speak. He wrote in English, obviously, but there was a way of speaking that you have to learn how to interpret. But the themes and the ideas and the characters, like, all these things made sense to audiences back then, but now we're so smart they don't make sense to us now. Like, how does that fit, right?
Yeah.
To your point, like, this is for the people.
Yeah, I want to draw a distinction, because I think we're actually talking about two different types of elitism.
Okay.
So the one where you referred to is the sense of, oh, you have to be very, very enlightened to understand Shakespeare and all this whatnot, and you have to have attended the right universities, whatever. I think that's actually, if not dead, certainly on its way out. I think that perspective. Okay. I think the elitism that I refer to is actually, it's far more sinister, in that what it is, it's these people saying that you have to be enlightened and you just don't understand these things about complete garbage. They're saying that about complete garbage. Like, at least before it was, okay, this snooty professor may be saying about something that's actually good, but now it's people saying about utter crap.
Oh,
and
great
they keep
point.
telling you that the emperor's clothes are marvelous and you just can't understand it. The reality, he is freaking naked. He has nothing on. This is a complete sham, but it's being sold. I think that type of elitism is, at least from my perspective, I'm a little bit younger than you, but I think what my generation, people younger than me, are experiencing is far more of that. It's far more these pretentious idiots and evil people. I mean, like I really I lose no love. Because I think it's so awful what they are doing is they are degrading people by telling them that this is art in the first place. They're telling that you shouldn't respect this, and what they're serving up is crap on a golden platter. I mean, that is really what it is. It is despicable, disrespectful to the everyday man, the everyday woman, because they deserve better. I'm going back to this point of like the populist elitism. You know, I'm just going to try to coin that phrase now. Like it really is. They deserve better, and I'm tired of these people trying to shove this crap in their face and just be like, not only does someone throw poop in your face, but they actually tell you that you should like it, and they tell you that if you don't like it, it's just because you're not enlightened.
Like the banana taped to a wall, like that.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. It's like you just don't get it because you're not smart enough to understand this objective piece of garbage. Right. And the reason why you can even pretend it's not an objective piece of garbage is because someone paid millions of dollars for it. It's like, oh, someone paid billions of dollars for this. Wow. It must be intelligent. It's like, no, it's trash. It's literal trash that they've laundered some money to make you think that it's important. Right. That's a great point about the elitism, you know, that not only have they made the truly great works of art inaccessible and degraded our taste buds for being able to experience them, they've taken that and into that gap, they've put trash and saying, and then told you that this trash you're not capable of understanding. So you're sitting with deprived of beauty, being almost force-fed garbage that you're like, you don't even deserve this. Profoundly dehumanizing when you put it that way.
It is. Dehumanizing is the accurate word, and I'm glad you used that. Because when you take that and then compare it to someone who at least it's obvious that they know more than you about a certain thing, it's like, well, 10 times out of 10, I'm going to go and sit down with that person, even if they are a little like hooty snooty, because at least they're there to teach. You know, at least I can learn something from them. Like it's not, and at least the thing that they're talking about is beautiful in the first place. You know, so all that being said. Again, obviously, I think it is dehumanizing what the elites of today and the people who are, you know, elitist in these ways are doing, because they're, again, serving up crap on a silver platter and telling you that it's something that you just don't get. You're just not smart enough to experience. When in reality, what the everyday man and woman deserves is beauty, and it is great works of art.
Yeah, it very much is an emperor's no clothes. Like, that's trash. I know that's trash. Right. Okay. So let's bring this back to Rewire the West, because all the values that we're talking about right now, you've embedded in your website, in your YouTube channel, and in your emails, especially, like all these different values of making, of again, rewiring the West, of recultivating taste buds, of re-experiencing beauty, you know, in sound and in art and in sculpture. It's all part of what you do. So like, I'm just going to go free reign and just go crazy, because like now I got it before, but now I really get it. And I think everyone listening will understand why what I think you're doing is so important, because what you do with Rewire the West is what I really wanted to be able to do more of with the Renaissance of Men. Like, I really intended to do much more poetry interpretations. I wanted to get an art interpretation, but you know, the journey becomes what it is. And so now I explore all these things that I do, and I get to do my poetry episodes, which is the chance to instantiate those values in a really powerful and potent way in small doses. But what you do is you do so much more of what I don't want to say I wish I could do, but like it's not what I wish I could do, because you embody the values that I want to do more of. You know what I mean? So please just kind of go with that.
Wow. Well, first of all, thank you for the high praise. It really does mean a lot, and it certainly means a lot coming from you. So I definitely appreciate that. In the sense of just, man, I mean, it is pretty open-ended, and maybe I need a little bit more direction.
Sure.
I think I mean, tell me, like, what in particular, what avenue would you like me to go down? Because I would love a little bit of steering right here.
Sure. That's totally fine. So for giving you some direction, I can do that. And I would say, what do you love most about what you do? Let's start there.
I really love conveying passion and seeing how that actually makes a difference in people's life. So probably what I love most about what I do is just simply the emails that I get from people.
Oh, wow.
Where they have interacted with this stuff and it's actually made a difference in their life. I think that's one of the most wonderful things. I mean, every time I get one of those emails, it makes my week, really. And so just knowing that what I'm talking about, what I'm doing, that, I'm not just talking about it as if like talking about an ideal that has no practical implications in reality. It's like, no, there actually is meat behind what I'm saying. And that's nice just to feel like you're actually making an impact in others' lives. I'm sure that this is something that you've experienced as well, plenty of times to like, that's the ultimate thing that you can be grateful for. It's just when someone comes up to you and be like, hey, you made a difference. And now my life is better off because of it. And, in my case, it's not even like really even me who's making the difference. I'm just saying, hey, here are things that will make a difference in your life. You should check them out. And then people go and check them out and they do inevitably make a difference in their life. And then they just say, hey, I really appreciate you pointing me in that direction. It made a big impact.
But I think it is actually, I mean, I know what you mean. Like the email that you write about Wagner is not Wagner, right? Like that, they're not the same thing. But what I see you doing that I think is really important is it would be one thing if you and I were just sitting here talking about works of art and beauty that have inspired us, right? But we're also talking about how a lot of people's taste buds for being able to experience that art have been sanded down. And so it's kind of like there needs to be this rehabilitation of the aesthetic, artistic sense that the artists themselves didn't have to do. Like Shakespeare didn't have to, we'll like spoon feed people what he was doing, right? And he didn't.
And I just want to pause there because I don't think people actually, like, you might say that, but people might not believe it. I am here to say 100% that is true. That is true. There have been some really great papers in just kind of academic writings and whatnot that I've come across that posit the thesis essentially that people in Shakespeare's time were insanely more self-aware than people in our age are. And that's not to say like, oh, the past was inevitably greater. It's to say that these kind of moments come in ebbs and flows. And just as it happened in Elizabethan England at the time Shakespeare was writing, like they had a self-awareness to them that we lack. And so he really did not have to spoon feed people this. People were flocking to it because not only was it, witty and good, but also it could entertain, but it entertained in a way that uplifted them.
Yeah.
And to, again, tie this back to some of what we see today, art should ultimately uplift. And I think we find that the best stories do. Lord of the Rings does. Yeah. Even the original trilogy of Star Wars does, because it's a boy who had hope and he hung on to it in the face of all odds. And look, like things ended up for the better, and to show a complete contrast to that, look how the latest trilogy of Star Wars completely desecrated Luke's legacy.
Yeah.
They said, oh no, someone who's hopeful like that can't actually last. They'll become a cynic. They'll become so much of a cynic that they actually contemplate murdering someone for upholding the ideals that they once upheld.
Mm-hmm.
Think about that. And so in Shakespeare's time, just to bring this back full circle, it wasn't force feeding. It was really like people had they had standards that they would hold the playwrights themselves to, and the playwrights would deliver.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Much Ado About Nothing, and one of the things I wanted to say is that movie was actually excellent. I remember watching it with Kenneth Branagh, and I think that was the one with Denzel Washington and Emma Thompson. Yeah, Emma Thompson. Right. And so like people through Kenneth Branagh is probably one of the best adapters of Shakespeare for the modern day of putting him into cinema. I need to see the Kenneth Branagh Hamlet. Actually, that's on my list. But you're right. Like back then, people didn't have to be, they didn't have to rehabilitate their sense because everything that they valued hadn't been so consistently and thoroughly destroyed. Right. And you could have Shakespeare playing with the idea of like, well, okay, so I'm going to invent this character Hamlet who's actually like a very human hero, right? And I'm talking about this in the podcast where it's like Hamlet has all this self-doubt and is conflicted and, never really decides to take decisive action like we're familiar with heroes doing. Like, I'm going to do this thing. He's just kind of stumbles into his own destiny. And, it's this strange thing. It's like that freedom to explore the notion of heroism itself, right, was just kind of there. And now it's like, no, now we can't even have heroes. We have to demolish heroes, and we have to, raise up essentially superhuman women. It's what it is. Raise up superhuman women who aren't like any actual women, who are like the perfected version of some human in a little tiny girl body, right? That's our heroes now. It's like, that's not actually a hero. It's not even a person. Right. And so,
sorry, just on the female note too, Shakespeare's women are some of the most incredible women.
Yes.
Think about this. Like for a time that was so quote unquote supposedly patriarchal. I mean, those female characters now, today's quote unquote strong female characters, they're practically just men. They do all the things that men would have done in superhero films, 10 years ago. Yeah. But Shakespeare's women, they bring a cunning, a wit, a strength that is diverse from that of the men that he writes. Yeah. But they are just as lovable. They're incredible characters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that gets lost. Like, if you ever really want to know, how society viewed women and how women viewed themselves, right, prior to propaganda, just go read great literature, right? Mm-hmm. Go read Jane Austen. Right? Like Jane, you can just read it, and it's like in Jane Austen, it's in Pride and Prejudice. She paints such a moving picture of the different kinds of women, and how they fit. Or read Virginia Woolf, right? And you can read these great works of literature, and you can see that, women were laboring under the yoke of oppressive patriarchy. It's like, no, they had their own inner lives, their own realities that they were happy to navigate, and that was completely separate and balanced with men. And it's almost like we can't see through 150 years or more of feminist propaganda to see how the reality actually was. Like, no, don't go look at that. They take away our ability to appreciate great art, to engage with it, that it's even valuable, and then they give us garbage instead. And then we lose all connection with our history so that we can be told who we are rather than actually know who we are. Right. Mm. And when you know who you are as a man, you become, and a woman too, you become dangerous. And I think that's a big part of the vacuuming out beauty from our society and weakening us, particularly as men in a special way that makes us almost easier to control. Because if we could engage with, pick your great arts, we're picking on Shakespeare right now, or whatever, like poetry, whatever, we would actually like, no, that's crap, and your emperor has no clothes.
Exactly. I love that.
So let's work through some of your favorite videos or some of your favorite articles, because what I would like to do is the vision that I have in my mind is to make part of this conversation at least practical. So someone's listening to this, like, cool, I get it, I get the vision. Like, where do I start? And then what's my first step? And then what's my second step? What's the training wheels I got to put on the bike so that I can learn to ride the tricycle, and then I can learn to ride the bicycle and then the motorcycle, right? Like, how can we begin moving men and the women listening too in that direction?
Well, thanks for that. I think probably initially just go and check out the channel, check out the website if it's something you like. But I mean, I'm actually going to draw out some steps here. Experience some of what the channel has to offer. It's a rather kind of diverse field, and so there are different places to start. You could start with a video like Pop is Porn, which is again talking kind of about music and whatnot, and trying to challenge some of our presumptions about that. There's another video in a very different vein called Beowulf and Toxic Masculinity, which is a dive into looking at masculinity as how it was portrayed in obviously an Old English poem, and how that can be applicable to our lives today. One of the things that I just, as a creator, that I really love was the series I did on Dante. Mm. It was the first series I did where I was actually on camera, and it was a dive into Dante's Purgatory, which most people only know Inferno. Obviously, the Divine Comedy is Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. But it was a look at the Divine Comedy through the lens of self-development. So essentially, Dante in his Purgatorio, he's going up this mountain, and each terrace of that mountain is curing him and all the souls on each terrace of one of the seven deadly sins. And so it's a look at how that can actually be applied to our own lives. And I think it's a good, perhaps, what I hope to have done with it is to provide an example of how you can look at something in literature and actually get a rather concrete glimpse at how this can impact your life practically. Because Dante provides some wonderful examples. And now what I do, again, I speak about it very kind of down to earth in the sense of a, again, self-development perspective. But now imagine actually reading it where you're getting all those self-development nuggets, if you will, but you're also getting it with the art of Dante, the beautiful poetry of it, the symbolism. I mean, that's what happens when you actually read the darn thing.
Yes.
So which I hope people will do. Even better if you can do it in Italian, because then, I mean, that's just full body Dante, man. It's amazing.
First learn Italian, then read Dante.
Yes. But I think those are some good places to start. I really, on a personal level, I was really proud of the Modernity Has Cheated You video that I put out, more so aesthetically, because I believe if anyone wants an indication perhaps where the channel is going, that is certainly where I will be taking it. In the sense of trying to create art that is beautiful too. I don't simply, and this has been the biggest challenge since day one, Will, is that I have been, talking about things that are beautiful and actively aware that I cannot do so while speaking in a room by myself into a camera.
Yeah.
Because what a hypocrite, right? I have to try to do it to the best of my ability in a way that I'm actually, conveying things beautifully. And so I believe this particular video, the Modernity Has Cheated You on, I shot it in London and was able to get some really good B-roll of just the beautiful architecture of the city and kind of what I would share. It would cut back and forth between a voiceover and in-person, and the in-person, I got to use Shakespeare's Globe as a backdrop and St. Paul's Cathedral, and then, got to play around some B-roll. And even the music, I got to incorporate some of my favorite classical music. So particularly, it was the prelude to Act 3 of La Traviata by Verdi. That's an opera. In the middle of the piece somewhere is a piece from Carmen, Bizet's opera. And then there's just a couple other classical pieces, but to actually string together, finally, I felt like it was, the connection of, all right, bringing the music, bringing the visuals, bringing the content more or less, and trying to end on while perhaps pointing out a problem that's present. What I don't want to do is I don't want to be a polemicist and only talk about what's going wrong in the world all the time. I ultimately want to end up on a positive note and say, this is what all this can point to. And so I hope, I would like to think that video was a good culmination of that pursuit. Although a culmination which turns into the launching point for what's to come. So if I can tease that, I'll simply say that this Thanksgiving week, I don't know when this podcast will come out, but the week of Thanksgiving, 2022, I will be in Rome in a very particular micro state in the heart of that city, getting some beautiful, beautiful footage. And if you have figured out where it is, that's going to be the backdrop for a lot of wonderful stuff to come. So that's kind of the direction where I'm going, is trying to inspire people with the actual visual beauty of what's going on. Trying to bring in more music and whatnot, to make the actual experience of the videos also point to the ideal that I'm talking about. But let's bring this back to the practical thing. of what, where can people go? I'd say check out the channel, check out some of those videos I just said. But then every week I put out an email that kicks off with a quote, some weekly updates, but then it has a video of the week, it has an article of the week, it has a painting of the week, and it has music of the week. And so I think that's a great way to get into it, in the sense of like, hey, if you just don't really even know where to start and just want, servings of stuff to come your way each week, well then, that's where you go. If you go there, you're going to get a video, you're going to get a classical painting, you're going to get an article about a classical work, and you're going to get typically literature. And you're also going to get, a great piece of classical music and some background and, I guess some description of what it is that you're actually dealing with in each email. So that's a great place to start. Everyone who signs up to the list will also get my ebook on Shakespeare, in which I look at 5 different chapters or 5 different plays of Shakespeare and try to tie them back to our lives today in a very practical level. I'm trying to remember the whole subtitle of the book, but it's called The Bard and the Bees, What Shakespeare Taught Me About Sex, Evil, and Life in Our Modern World. I'll have to go check this out later to see if I actually got that tagline right, but I think that's it. So anyways, they'll get that. So it's something that they can read and kind of dive into, like, all right, how does something like Shakespeare, how can it actually, what actual practical takeaways can it have? I would like to think that in the book, I do a good deal of sharing that in terms of showing a reader like, hey, this is actually something that you can do. And so at the very least, it's showing them that, hey, this is possible. Like, yeah, if you don't believe me, sign up for the emails, check out the book. And if you give it its due, I would like to think that you'll start to have a better idea for how you can actually apply these things to your life. And then of course the website has more articles on, how to understand classical music, both in terms of kind of how they do the titles of it, about the different periods of classical music. So Baroque, classical, romantic, and it has different recommendations for each period. I mean, I really just try to have it be a beginner's thing, because the thing is, this is a journey that I'm on too, and I'm essentially just documenting my journey and sharing it with others as I go, in hopes that they also get a lot out of it along the way as well.
I think what one of the things I love most about what you do is that you're talking about what we might call like high aesthetics, right? Art and beauty at the highest level of achievement. And you don't just do it in like, Microsoft Word Calibri kind of documents. You know what I mean? Like, right? You invest your time, your money, and your energy, a substantial amount of it, in making what you do as beautiful aesthetically, to create the proper way to appreciate the things that you're talking about. And I think that's a really underappreciated aspect of content creation. Like, you do honor to the pieces that you're talking about by investing your own creative self in formatting. That's such a boring word anyway. Formatting and editing and shooting and videography and B-roll, to really make it be like, no, I'm going to communicate to you about these great works of art in a modern style that speaks to us, the meta communication of it. Like, aesthetics matter. And so I'm going to make my aesthetics matter to make the point. And I think that's one of the most impressive things about what you do is when we first met and started talking, and I went to your website and signed up for the email list and got the Shakespeare book and started watching the videos, it's like, oh wow, this guy takes it really seriously, right? Because it would be easy, and there are a lot of channels on YouTube that do this, that talk about art but don't invest any of themselves in the aesthetic, right? And maybe the information is good, and maybe they do some B-roll cuts away to stuff like that, right? And so you get the information, but you don't get the experience. And you've invested a lot of yourself in creating an experience for the viewer or an experience for the reader. And I think that's so totally different. And it's really high effort, which is everything I do is super high effort. So I appreciate that you do that, really.
Yeah. Well, thank you. You certainly get it as well, because you're right. All your stuff is very much in the same vein of, I know that you put yourself into it, and really appreciate that. I would say that, yes, all of what I've tried to convey I made a very conscious decision that I don't want it to be informational. I want it
Yeah.
to be inspirational.
Yeah. Great.
And so all of that, like, it is conveying information, but the biggest thing that it needs to convey is a sense of inspiration. Like, this needs to be something that is going to motivate someone to actually go and, do something, like to make a change, to make their life for the better, because no one cares about the information is completely useless if it has zero impact in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you could have all this information, you could have all this knowledge, but perhaps, I don't know if this is a good, I don't know this is a good definition of wisdom, but just kind of on the fly, I'll propose it. But wisdom being knowledge applied well, because knowledge by itself is essentially without value. And wisdom is knowing what to do with that knowledge, when to do what you do with that knowledge, and how to do it well. And so, to bring this back to, the videos and whatnot, all the content that I put out with Rewire the West, I want it to ultimately be inspirational. Like, this is something that, is motivating, and it's something that can inspire you to higher ideals, to do things. I mean, like Lord of the Rings, again, perfect example of art that inspires. It's not you could know all the like little facts you want to know about Elvish or about the geography and topography of Middle Earth, but what's most impactful, what you remember from the story of Lord of the Rings, is those moments of inspiration that come across, those moments of hope, those moments of, as Tolkien coined it, eucatastrophe, as in a positive catastrophe, something that unexpected grace and to put it simply, a happy ending. Like, that is what is inspiring about a lot of this stuff, and that's what ultimately has millions of people around the world every day walking away from Tolkien and feeling inspired.
I'm glad you mentioned Tolkien, because I've said many times on different podcasts, including my own, that it was Lord of the Rings that was the very beginning of my journey through masculinity. Was recognizing all the different, was recognizing all the different ways masculinity is reflected in Lord of the Rings, and what I've learned, and I learned that in fall 2001, so September, October, November 2001, in a class on Jung that I took during that semester, that quarter. I've evolved on it since then, because I spent 20 years thinking about it. And so someday I'm going to take the things that I learned back then and put it, I don't know, into its own course or its own book or its own material, so that men can see that, right? And so that men can draw forth some of the inspiration that I did and put it into their lives, and how. But not just that, I think people feel that when they encounter it, like the beauty of Lord of the Rings for both men and women. And I'll talk about femininity in Lord of the Rings as well, because I've thought a lot about that too, is that you can't necessarily identify what it is about the books. Like, yeah, you can pick out some things, but there's just this feeling from it that you walk away and you're improved for it. And maybe you can say it's because of this or this, but there's something within it, some spiritual. And when I say spiritual, I don't mean in a religious sense, although that's part of Lord of the Rings in particular, but there's this spiritual quality where it's nourishing, and we can't quite say why. It's a sense of like, it's not just that it tastes really good. We digest it and we take it in and we're changed.
Absolutely. Tolkien said regarding Lord of the Rings that he explicitly or specifically removed all explicit references to any sort of religion or whatnot in the world, in his created world, because he allowed the entire story was baked with religious symbolism, and he allowed the symbolism to speak for itself and to imbue the spiritual and religious elements into the story.
And what's funny is that the Lord of the Rings world, Middle Earth, actually has a god. Eru.
It does. Like his mythology and kind of his world does. But in the Lord of the Rings, it's not like, oh, we must say a prayer to so-and-so, or here's the specific religious ritual. Yeah. All that's completely removed, but you walk away from it with an unfailing sense of spirituality. It's because he got the archetypes right. He got the symbolism right. And within those symbolisms and archetypes, he built in all the spiritual meat, if you will, of the work.
And to put a pin on that for the listeners who haven't perhaps read the Silmarillion, the god who creates Middle Earth is called Eru Iluvatar, essentially the Western god equivalent to Yahweh, you might say, and the devil is Melkor. And there's a whole creation mythology, like where the Lord of the Rings universe came from. And so you have God and the devil, but then the devil Melkor actually comes down to Middle Earth, as a warrior, as an actual embodied physical character, and Sauron is Melkor, who becomes Morgoth, is Melkor's lieutenant. So the Sauron that we encounter in the movies and in the Lord of the Rings books, who's pretty evil, bad dude, is just like a 30% pale shadow, almost reflection of how evil Morgoth is at the highest, most transcendent level. And so that Eru Iluvatar exists, and then there are the Valar, and then the Maiar, and all this stuff. There's this whole spiritual, that like Morgoth, Melkor is this truly evil, right? And this whole religious structure is known. Like Gandalf in the Lord of the Rings is actually this divine being, right? Like, yeah, exactly. And that's why they have to fight, right? And so but this whole religious world is just kind of known by the characters, but you never actually see them making any prayers to Eru Iluvatar. There's actually even no acknowledgement of it. And you can forgive Sam and Frodo and the hobbits for not knowing about it because maybe they don't. But Aragorn knows, Legolas knows for sure, but you never feel that. You never feel that oh, here, we're walking with Gandalf, this divine being. You don't ever feel it. And so I think that's the level. I'm grateful that the Lord of the Rings movies exist, and they even bastardized them with the Rings of Power, which I didn't watch and refused to watch. But it just kind of the Rings of Power might be a great object lesson in terms of, we have this great artistic tradition, this incredible artistic tradition for generations, and then that produces the Lord of the Rings as this singular work of fantasy is an insult because fantasy is much smaller now than the singular creative literary work. And then what do we get? We get Amazon's Rings of Power, where they shoehorn in all these must reflect the modern world values into something that transcends it. They failed miserably because they would. But so I was talking about, the meal was at Clooney was laid out in the form of story. We're used to stories and meals being appetizer, which is a certain set of flavors, right? And then main course, which is where the protein is, and then you have dessert, right? Or if you go to a more fancy restaurant, you have the amuse-bouche, right? And then you have the appetizer, and then you have the salad course, right? So at Clooney, it told this whole story of what Maori food was like in New Zealand, fused with sort of Western cooking techniques, right? Very artistic. But the reason why one of the reasons why the meal was exhausting was because taking in that much information through the taste buds is tough. Mm-hmm. It is on a fat data pipe. Let's say, right? Yeah. But it was this total experience of of that evolved and flowed through all these different flavors and textures and shapes and visuals and all and sound and all that stuff was woven into it. It was really, really special. And we're used to thinking of story in the way of a movie or a book. But one of the things that you've helped me see is that story actually shows up in classical music as well. Right. Oh, and that's something that I'd like you to talk about, because classical music is something that I've enjoyed, but it's not something I know a whole ton about. So what are some of your favorite narrative classical pieces, let's say? And we'll start there.
This is a great question. There's so many different ways to go with this. One thing that I'd like to point out, I actually, funnily enough, mentioned this in a video about ballet. It's called something like Why... I actually have no clue what it's called. Ballet and Femininity or something like that.
Yep.
But
I saw it recently. Yeah.
Yeah, it's there. But I talk about the motion in music, and movement in music is something that's incredibly important, because whatever you listen to, you really have to keep in mind the perceived motion that's occurring. So I believe in this video I mentioned something like Swan Lake, where hopefully I don't make a fool of myself right here, but it's, do 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 do, and as it's doing that, you get this sense that it's climbing, that it's actually seeking to break out of something. Okay, it goes up the first time and it doesn't quite get it. It's do 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 do, a little closer there, and then it goes do 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 All right, so like that attempt has failed. And the reason I bring this up in the context of story is because if you track that motion through a piece, that tells you a little bit about the story that's being told. Now, obviously, this will change a lot depending on the era of music that you're listening to. So this is primarily the Romantic era of classical music. For our intents and purposes in this conversation, I'll break it up into, let's say, 3 periods: Baroque, Classical, and Romantic. All right. So Baroque would be Bach, very
Vivaldi.
Very counterpoint. I'm trying to think of. Can you hum Vivaldi real fast?
No.
Okay. But Four Seasons. So if anyone's aware of that,
my favorite classical piece.
Yeah, it's wonderful. But so you have Baroque there, and then you have Classical. And so here, I mean, Mozart is the exemplar of that. And Classical, actually, my appreciation of Classical and Baroque has augmented quite a bit in the past few months, and I can get into that because I think it's really exciting, kind of what I've come across, at least personally there. But all this being said, bring it home to movement. What you have with romantic music is you have this story and this emotion that's based around the movement. Beethoven technically he is the bridge between kind of classic and romantic periods, but I would say overwhelmingly romantic. Wagner, romantic. All of the great opera composers, well, not all, but a good amount kind of they're in the romantic tradition. Wagner, Verdi, Puccini, definitely, where you really feel this emotion. Tchaikovsky, another composer who did Swan Lake, he's obviously in this romantic tradition as well. And so all this to say, the motion that you observe, you have to track it because it's the motion that builds tension in the music, because as you get the do 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 do, that is each time that it goes up, you're building towards something. And so and then you kind of go to a different fast forwarding in that piece. There's do 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 do. And so you like all of this, if you're following it, you have this kind of do 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 do. It's this back and forth, and then almost a stalling of the do 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 do. I really hope my pitch is on here, but
no, it's perfect.
I'm
really impressed.
I've never done this before, so try my best here. But
it's great, man.
But really,
I'm smiling. I love it.
Yeah, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see probably how red my face is right now. Anyways, fun. What we have is the movement creates tension, and I think in that tension creates the story, and this is so reflective of our own lives because. What is it that we do in our own lives? Well, if we're living, we're moving, because really to be stalled in life, actually you have a sense of dread. You have a sense of a death of sorts. And so to be alive is to be in motion in many ways. And what you have with this music, and the reason partially why it resonates with us, this specific, subset of classical music, is because it's an exploration of that motion, of the conflict that arises from it. Because being in motion, being in life, you are going through the inevitable conflicts that arise, the triumphs and the falls that you go through. And it's how you ultimately overcome it and how you ultimately resolve it. That is beautiful. But classical music, you cannot listen to it with a sense of you're just going to consume it. Or you're going to be, it's going to be in the background music, because first of all, that's not how life is. Life is written not just by like, okay, I want to figure out what's on my, what's written in my obituary. That would be if you wanted just to consume it, and to know what it's about. But no, life is lived in the experience, in the living. And likewise, classical music is lived in the moment of it, in the journey of what's there. And so that's just one of the reasons I really find that beautiful. Now, if you'll allow me to kind of keep going down here, then
I will allow you.
Great. Thank you. But I'd also say what you have with opera, which is so great, is exactly what you have in Lord of the Rings. And I'll use this to provide an example that probably more people can relate to. But with Lord of the Rings, you have these themes, okay, that are associated with certain things. So the ring kind of has this mysterious aura associated with it. It's what plays during the title screen of each movie. The Shire obviously has a very recognizable theme that comes on, and these themes are kind of recycled throughout. And what these are essentially are a type of type of music is not the right word, but an aspect of music that was first pioneered in opera called a leitmotif. Okay. And what this leitmotif is it's a certain theme associated with different people or characters, even ideas in the stories. Okay. So the master of this is Wagner. I mean, Wagner, he has leitmotifs for everything. He has leitmotifs for a person. He has leitmotifs for the sound of the steps of that person. I mean, it really he gets so insanely complex in his leitmotifs, and this is why, like, Wagner, you first experience him, it's just completely overwhelming. But the more you enjoy of him, the more you get out. I mean, it is, prime example of this, because his motifs as they're recycling through, they keep on coming back and actually kind of telling the story and cueing you in on what to think. Oh, this person's coming, or oh no, it's this theme that's actually telling the story, and this is how the story is told. This is why opera is so great, because it's telling the story not only through music, but also in certain composers you get it through the use of leitmotifs of themes that are associated with certain people, with certain actions, with certain ideas, with ideals even themselves, love. Like the love theme, the this, the that, the other. I mean, it's all there. So the storytelling in opera is something beautiful that you get. Puccini does it very well, very well. Is also perhaps even in a more immediately accessible way to Wagner. In Puccini, what he does beautifully in the music is he brings objects to life, and I'm going to try to go into this now. Part of this, to really get an appreciation, you do have to see the opera, unfortunately, because it's just something where you won't totally get the context of what's going on. But in this one opera, La Bohème, it's basically these young boys, young men in Paris, and just enduring the cold of the Paris winter, and they're all bohemian. And they're having to, at one point, they go and they actually burn their, play manuscripts and whatnot. And they're burning their chairs for heat and whatnot. And anyways, they throw in a first page of the play and they throw it into the fire. And you hear in the orchestra this kindling, almost as like the fire is starting, and everything drops back. And it's like, how did he put the kindling of a fire into music? It's beyond me, but he does it wonderfully. And so that's just another form of storytelling. And I'm going to wrap up here with 1/3. So we have, the first being the romantic kind of storytelling, in following the motion of music, and following the journey that's going on. I mean, just listen to Beethoven and you'll get that immediately. The second is the musical storytelling, returning to these themes, returning to whether it's leitmotifs or simply almost the embodiment of ideals or characters in different musical pieces. You have that in opera very well, which of course has made its way into modern cinema. And then lastly, what you have is perhaps the most surprising of them all, and what I said earlier about Baroque and classical music, which is that Baroque and classical, we know that it's good, but it's to be honest, it's kind of hard to get into because it almost feels a little bit bland. Okay. And what I realized, what I said that I'm very excited about it, is that I realized that we are listening to Mozart with ears that were tuned by Beethoven.
Yeah, I remember you said that to me. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. Elaborate on that.
Yeah. So Beethoven, again, he will hit you over the head with emotion. He will say, "This is how you should feel," and he will, bring it to you, and damn it, like you will feel that way, because he's so good at evoking that emotion in you. Now, and he tells a story by doing so. Now, what you have with Mozart's the complete opposite. He says, I'm going to make something neutral, and I'm going to allow you to bring your emotion to it. I'm going to actually let you tell the story. And so if anyone is familiar with filming, for example, so you can record, most cameras have a default, color profile that they have, but oftentimes you can record in log. And so what it actually looks like is essentially, it almost kind of looks black and white. But what it allows you to do is it's gray, and it allows you to go in and add your own color to have it specifically how you want it. And once I understood this about Mozart and about Bach before him, then my appreciation of it jumped immensely. Because what I realized is that Mozart's music, the majority of it, if I can, take the liberty to say that, classical music, of Baroque music, it's written in a way that allows you to bring your story to it and actually apply that story to your life. I just, it
get it.
really transformed the way I listen, because now I listen to Mozart pieces and like, this could be used in a variety of different scenarios. If you kind of picture your life as a little movie that you're going, it's like, well, this piece, it could be something like a nice morning, a nice autumn morning where you're going and just making a warm cup of coffee and sitting down. It could be driving in traffic. It could also be, like phones ringing at the office. It could be, even a sports game or something. Like, it could be so many different things, but it's almost what you bring to it. So it's an acquired taste, but what's nice about it is that if you want to tell your story, Mozart and Bach provide a platform in which you can go and listen to their music, but write your own story into it alongside them.
I really like that, because I get it now. I get what you're saying. It's like you can look at Beethoven like Ode to Joy, right? Ode to Joy is going to beat you over the head with a club of happiness, of joy, really. It's like, you will feel this right now, and you don't have a choice in the matter. And it's like, yes, I do. I feel it, right? But then when you listen to, by comparison, you listen to Mozart, and it feels very delicate and very, it's expert. It's beautifully composed, but it's not as present. Like, you have to kind of reach out to it a bit more. But I get that's a stylistic thing. And I like what you said, that there are these three phases of what we call, quote, classical music. There's Baroque, classical, and romantic. And we just hear it's all classical music now. It all just kind of lumped together. But these three distinct phases are all so different. And the word itself kind of obscures our ability to understand it in general. Like, how is Beethoven different from Mozart? How is Puccini different from Verdi? How are they different from Shostakovich and all that stuff? And I want to point something else out that you said. It's that to really appreciate a classical music piece, if you can't be in the auditorium or you can't be at the symphony, it's not meant to be put on in the background.
No.
And that's it's a lot of people use it now for ambiance. Like, I'm just going to put on whatever and like, cool, fine. But to really appreciate classical music is like a 60-minute effort of sustained attention. And so I'm just trying to imagine someone being like, yeah, get your favorite comfortable chair, sit down on it, put it on a speaker and sit there and listen, and throw your phone across the room and sit there and listen to it. And that's how you're meant to consume it, not as this background kind of experience, to what you're doing. And if I can just jump off that for a second, I think what creates that feeling in people is the idea that really the only time they ever experience classical music now or anything close to it is movie soundtracks. Like, I heard someone say that movie soundtracks are our current version of classical music, but it's always background to action.
Yeah.
Right? Like, some of the classic soundtracks like Star Wars, you can go see the symphony perform Star Wars while the movie's playing, but that's not the same thing as like, you're just going for the music. Yeah. So we always experience like classical orchestras now as background to action, when it's like, no, you're supposed to enjoy this thing for what it is. Do we, and I was going to ask, do we have the sustained attention? And instead I'm going to declare we have to develop the sustained attention, because we're missing it. We're missing it.
Absolutely. I mean, that is really one of the biggest things, is that when you get into classical music, It is active listening. It is not passive listening. And perhaps the hardest part about that is the attention. It is the twitch. It is the gotta like do something. It's hard to sit down. It really is like hard to sit down. You know, what I like in life, I have a big appreciation of the little things that allow me to kind of do nothing. Technically doing something, but it allows me to enjoy doing nothing better. So for me personally, this is like my pipe. It's something that I can smoke and kind of focus on my breath because it's that, but it almost allows me to get into a more meditative state and do nothing better than simply sitting in a chair and doing nothing. And so
yes,
I hope this
yes, I get it.
Makes some sense.
I'm not doing anything, but I'm not doing nothing.
Exactly. It allows me at least to even just like the whiffs of smoke that float in front of my face. It captivates my attention just enough to kind of tolerate me and not drive me to insanity by sitting in a room by myself. You know that, like, because it is really hard to sit by ourselves. But anyways, all this to say, it's a habit that we have to cultivate. And with classical music, part of the difficulty is, of course, in the first place, finding that attention and the time to sit down. You know, you shouldn't. I'll say it here if you're listening. You shouldn't start out with something that's an hour long. Okay, what you should do is start out with something that's much shorter. You should start out with Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Now, I will tell you, I'll say for the sake of a pure beginner, just start out with the beginning part, the part that everyone knows. The Moonlight Sonata is actually, so it's actually, there are 3 parts to it, and most people only recognize the first. The third is like insane. It's amazing when you listen to it. So definitely listen to the whole thing. But if you don't do anything more, I would say take a moment before you go to bed, light a candle, sit down, either have like a nice warm cup of tea. If you're the whiskey drinking folk, you know, perhaps get a nice little glass of whiskey. Just sit there with the lights dimmed, put it on, just kind of close your eyes and listen. You don't even have to close your eyes. You can just, if the lights are dim, just sit there, listen to it, take it in, and follow it. And follow the developments that go along with it. And it's just short enough to hold your attention. You're not going to go crazy sitting by yourself. It's going to be good. Okay, so do that. And just experience that. Just have that as the beginning. Now, after that, what you will get better at doing is you will actually get better at tracking the developments in the piece of music. So kind of going back to this idea of motion, I would add to that idea of motion, I would add to that actually the idea of having different choruses or themes that come up but are reiterated in different ways. So in our contemporary music, we have verse, chorus, bridge. So really, verse, chorus, bridge, you have kind of 3 different melodies that are going to be there, but it's the same thing. But what if you actually took one of those melodies and then you transform it 5 different times to where it's a variation of that initial one, but you can still track it so it's in that light. What you get better at doing every time you listen to classical music and you train your ear for it is you get better at recognizing how the composers transform these different melodies and how they're actually telling a story of that throughout the entire piece. So they'll start typically, like, take a Mozart concerto. A very typical progression of it is that you start out with something that's, kind of middle of the road speed. Okay. And in tempo and whatnot. And then the second movement is a reduction in tempo. It's more slow. And so it might reiterate in a different way, in a different light, in a more somber light, the themes that were presented in the first. And then the third is going to be almost the apotheosis of that in the different direction. Is it's going to take it up in tempo. It's going to do more complex variations and ultimately arrive at an intense finale that you're getting to. That is, a typical concerto, which is also, just while we're on the topic of Moonlight Sonata, one of the reasons why that is so interesting, because the first movement is the slow one. And so it's almost an inversion in some ways of kind of the traditional form, but he's still able to arrive home with it in magnificent ways. But um, I guess to bring this all home for our purposes, like kind of tracking the development of themes as they go along, not just the motion, but tracking the different melodies and how they'll evolve, how they'll change, how they'll get melted down and then reconstructed in something similar. Part of this is the magic of the music. And I think probably for beginners, that's one of the hardest things to wrap your mind across, because you don't necessarily see that, oh, melody B is in any form related to melody A. It actually is, but you don't see that connection. But the more time you spend with it, the more you'll be able to find those connections, and then you'll enjoy being able to see how that story is told, how the dots are connected.
I know a lot of people have in their bedrooms, they have a TV and they'll watch movies in bed. I could never do such a thing, but like that, a lot of people do that. And it sort of makes me think that, well, what if, if you're one of those people listening that has that, like, what if you got a pair of stereo speakers, like not one of those little Bose speakers. Like I've got a little Bose speaker. I like it. It sounds really good, but it's like essentially mono. It's like sound coming from one point. Like you get a pair of stereo speakers and you put them at the foot of the bed with the TV. Right. And you light that little candle and you sit and you put the music on, and rather than watching a movie while you go to bed, like you listen to a piece of classical music and do exactly what you're saying, Evan, which is like, no, engage with it, listen to it thoughtfully, like really be present with it and hear these things going on. And what a joy that could be. It doesn't have to be every night, but just try it and see what you might see, or hear what you might hear, rather, that takes you into the world of classical music, in the broadest sense, right? Not the specific period, and what you've been missing.
Yeah.
Right. Because orchestral music for film, what orchestral music for film is supposed to do is it's supposed to give you insight into the emotional state of the characters on screen, or tell you how to feel about the moment, right? So if there were no music during a movie, you would watch it and you wouldn't necessarily know how someone is feeling unless they're a really good actor. So music is there to tell you about the inner emotional states of the character, and then also to help guide us in how we're supposed to feel, right? So it sort of serves those two purposes. And it's always being driven by the visuals, right? The music and the score has to fit the visuals, because if it doesn't fit the visuals, like it's not going to make sense, right? And so the music is secondary to the visual content. Now, what you're talking about with classical music is it's music that's telling a story for its own sake, with no visuals that need to be associated with it. It's not. It's inviting you into the experience rather than a musical experience, rather than enhancing a visual experience. And those are two very different things. And so the ability to sit there and allow yourself to be taken away by someone who's so much a greater composer than anyone who composes for film. Like, yeah, Howard Shore is great. The guy who did the Inception, that guy, these great composers for film, they're wonderful composers, but I think that they would all say, like, yeah, no, Bach had it going on. Yeah. That's the guy. And so to really allow yourself to have 15 minutes or 20 minutes to experience it in the way that you're meant to, on its own terms. Like, I need to get some stereo speakers and do that tonight, because I've never done that exercise, right?
Yeah.
But I can feel that, like, there's so much in there, and there's this, and you said it earlier, there's this galaxy, this universe of classical music that's in the public domain.
Yeah.
And you have YouTube, like, it's all there. It's free, right? Yeah. Or Spotify, for that matter.
There is, well, first of all, before I get into the nitty gritty here, definitely love what you say. I think it would be something remarkable to do, and I would even say life-changing, if someone were to not even every night or every other night, but once a week, actually take the time to slow down and listen to a piece and listen intentionally. I think that would be life-changing, because part of what that does, what I find that it does when you listen closely to a piece, particularly when you're listening to it, a piece that's perhaps more, thoughtful or kind of slow or almost, takes you into a different world. What you do is you start to look for all the different textures there. You start to recognize, I can listen to a piece 50 times, and on the 51st time that I listen to it, I'll recognize something that this one instrument's doing in the corner of the orchestra that I didn't hear before.
Yeah.
And so it actually causes you to look for those things. And I think, to go back to the example I gave earlier of writing the journal, what this does is it allows you to have the same recognition of the beautiful things in your own life. I think that's really what it trains. For me, it's trained that in many ways. It's trained, again, that sense of looking for things and every time seeing something new or hearing it from a different perspective, or finding out, what's going on in this part of the orchestra. If you can apply that to your own life, see, wow, what is different about the walk to work today? What is something new that I haven't seen here? What is this one person doing, that however you want to put it together, I think you'll ultimately be able to apply it to your life. So there's that. In terms of more nitty gritty stuff, just a thought I had when you were mentioning, public domain and Spotify and stuff, it's all very well and good. One thing that people need to be aware of is that not all performances and recordings are created equal.
That is very true. I learned that. Yeah.
Yeah. So look, if you're on my email list, that's something where you'll know that every recording you get is going to be a good one. I'll make sure that it's a good recording and performance. But to understand what makes a good performance, that's another thing that takes time. And I think I told you about this, Will, but I'll repeat it to people listening. I had the funniest moment where I remember when I was getting into this, I would be looking for, recordings of pieces, and I couldn't tell you why, but I'd listen to a piece 5 times. And then when I came on the recorded version by the Berlin Philharmonic, I would settle and be like, oh yeah, I like this one the most. And
yes, they're pretty good.
And and it's not because they're new, by the way. It's not because they have the highest fidelity recordings. It's because all of them were coming from about the same time. Like almost all of them were from the 70s, maybe into the 80s a little bit. And I was like, I don't know what it is about this, but for some reason, whenever I listen to them, it's always their recording that I like the most. Well, come to realize, they're actually almost all those recordings by the Berlin Philharmonic. If you look it up on Spotify, I think it's technically like Berliner Philharmonica. It is all, they are all conducted by Herbert von Karajan. And this one man who is just, gosh, I mean, one of the best conductors to ever grace the stage. Definitely, arguably the entire 20th century, but like just phenomenal. And you realize that he's able to pull things out of the orchestra that other people simply aren't. And so, like, because we make fun of conductors all the time, they kind of do we don't really know what they're doing. They're kind of bouncing around. It's like, are they just waving a wand? But actually they have an incredibly tough job of they're trying to, I was blown away kind of as I began to learn more about this. And I still, to be honest, could stand to learn much more. But I know that one thing that conductors are trying to do is they're trying to get the timbre of each instrument. So let's say like there are 4 horns, okay? Identical horns in the sense of the same type of horn, but they're all different manufacturers. Well, that brass is going to be slightly different. Like they're going to be small, whether it's in the actual raw materials that make the horn, or if it's in the construction process and what the different alloys that they make it with, however long it sits to cool, to heat, to bend, like whatever it is, they're going to have a slightly different timbre each time. And so the conductor, an astute conductor, what he or she will do is will look at the person performing, and they'll be able to get the whole section together to actually make that timbre the same. I mean, it's incredibly difficult by hammering home to the players to play differently. So a player could play let's put it this way. A player could play the same piece of music on the same instrument, but if there are 4 different conductors, it could come out 4 different ways because each conductor would have a different ear for how that needs to be performed. And so there's that. There's also what I noticed in Karajan is the motion that he introduces. Okay, so we talked about this upwards motion again with Swan Lake, do 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 do, and you get that naturally in the dynamics of every orchestra, and the sense of kind of the crescendo, the kind of up and down of the music, the dynamics, the intensity. You get that, and it feels like this up and down. What Carillon can do is he adds this other dimension of filling it out sideways, which is it's so hard to describe. I really don't know how, other than you just have to go and listen to a ton of music and, listen to his recordings as opposed to others. But he almost adds like a heartbeat to it, to where you get this sense of this up and down, this vertical motion, but he adds this heartbeat to where it's every time on every beat, it's expanding as well. And just the whole body of it, it's insane. It's remarkable how good of a composer he is. But to bring this all home, I hope this tangent proves a little bit interesting in the sense of learning what conductors actually do, but B, knowing that the recordings you listen to actually do matter, and in fact will change the way that you appreciate the music, because the masters, you can't put words to it, but the people who are really good at what they do, it's good and it's different, and you'll know it when you hear it.
Yeah. Just real quick about that, like. When I was in college, I went to the school bookstore. For whatever reason, the bookstore had like stacks of classical CDs at the checkout line, and they were like $3 and $4. So I could buy all these classical music pieces, and I used to have, when I still had my CDs, like 20 pages full of classical. I'd just buy them. I'd be at the bookstore, and the book is fantastically expensive. So it's like, what's $4 for a classical CD? But then I realized that the label was Naxos, which is some German label, and it would always Greek, and so it would always. It took me a while of listening to them again in the background while I was studying to realize that like these recordings aren't actually very good, and the performances, like, they're not bad, but they're not great, right? And then when I discovered the German label Deutsche Grammophon, which is like this big gold kind of banner, and really experienced like high fidelity recording, best performers in the world, it really brought everything to life. And it was almost like listening to those old Naxos CDs was like, what is this? Yeah. What have I done? So that really matters. And so the label you get it from really matters. And, Lord's sake, if you're going to listen to a 60-minute classical piece on YouTube or on Spotify, like, pay for YouTube and Spotify so like an ad doesn't come up like 15 minutes in.
Gosh, that would be awful. Yeah,
that'd be awful. Yeah. Can you imagine? You're just start getting taken away, and then the algorithm serves you some ad for like Outback Steakhouse or something like that. Yeah. Just throw myself out the window. So it does actually matter, like to buy a CD or buy the MP3. Or buy the WAV file or whatever, buy the highest resolution you can, but like really set aside time to experience these things fully if you're going to listen to them, and don't allow it to be commercialized. So like to really put some thought and care into it. Right. And then so the other thing I'll say about composers is just that there's the way in which they get
composer or conductor.
Conductor. Thank you. That a conductor gets these 4 different horns with 4 different manufacturers and 4 different, right, to all have the same timbre, or at least complementary timbres to form that texture of that particular section. But then there's the up and down motion, the tension, and then there's the pace, right? Like the pace speeding up and slowing down, right? Rather than a consistent flat pace, you can modify that. There's the volume that you can make it seem to go further away and then be more in your face, right? And that's what I think, what I've listened, the limited amount that I've listened to Carillon is I listened to is Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, right? And so the way that he, as the conductor, interpreted the Ninth Symphony with how fast it is, it's just so fast, and it's so in your face in terms of the tempo, right? Of course, all the players are outstanding, but it's so much faster than I had ever been used to hearing it, like maybe 10 to 20% faster. But then the music would pull back quieter than I'd ever heard it. And then when it comes forward so much more powerful. It's like being knocked back in my chair. And that's all the interpretation. That's all the interpretation of the conductor, because to some extent it's written into the music, but the music is the music. the way that the conductor interprets it for his own character, the character of the players, the character of the audience, and carry on as being a German man and imbuing it with a German national character is very forceful, very straightforward, as opposed to the way an American orchestra might perform it. It's just, it felt like this. I'm hearing it for the first time. I'm hearing this symphony the way that Beethoven might have performed it for the first time. And
Absolutely.
So conductors matter more than we might imagine. And I would imagine conductors have specialties. The only conductor that I know of other than Carry On is Leonard Bernstein, right? And which reminds me, there is a series on YouTube of Leonard Bernstein teaching music. And so I'll post that in the show notes as well. I remember listening to that. Yeah, it's like the basics of music all the way up through. And so it's like, so I hope this is giving the listeners some sense of like, classical music is more than just what plays in the background, during a nice dinner. It can also be that, but it's almost like there's this experience that's waiting to be had if you can set aside the time and intention and attention to have it. And I think that could be such a mind-opening experience for people.
Absolutely. I surely hope it is. I would recommend just anyone who wants to do this practical thing, like, tonight, go and listen to the first part of Moonlight Sonata. Either that, or if you want something that's a little bit more lengthy, but and more subtle but profound, is the prelude to Act 1 of Lohengrin. Just, oh my gosh, Will, you've got to listen to that. When the strings come on, it's amazing. And then you get smaller and more layers each time as it goes on. I mean, it's really just, it's so remarkable. And it takes you about until he basically, so it's about an 11-minute piece, and the whole first 6 minutes works up to this climax. And then you get the climax maybe, 6 minutes, 6.5 in, and then the rest of it is kind of almost like the fade out and the resolution back to where it started in the beginning. But it's and it sounds so like, that sounds boring, right? It's like, okay, so it goes, I spend 6 minutes waiting to get like one crash and there we go. But it is, oh my gosh, addictive, really. Like it's just, it pulls you in. I told you that the first time I listened to it, I just had to stop what I was doing, go and sit down because I was hypnotized by it. And if you actually like, don't listen to it in your car on your way to work. Don't freaking do that. Like actually give it the space it deserves, and sit down with it. And if you do that, you have to have a reverence with it. It's the same thing. Like, I mean, there's so many parallels here to kind of a spiritual practice of sorts. You can't, like, sure, you can pray on the fly. There's nothing wrong with that. But like, if you actually take a moment to sit down, gather yourself, gather your thoughts, get into a private space and pray, it's a different, type of prayer in a way. I don't want to go too much into theology here, but like just in the sense of the experience of it is very different. And so the same thing certainly without a doubt applies to the experience of how you listen to classical music.
And also just an encouragement to give it space, meaning like, don't listen to it in headphones. Like, there's nothing wrong with headphones. If you got a pair of AirPods, fine. But to really put it on speakers and to let the music propagate through the air rather than, pressed against your head. Like, I have a very nice pair of AKG Pro Engineer headphones that I'm wearing right now. And they're very nice. And I come from a pro engineering background and I'm grateful to have them, but I would still buy a pair of speakers so that I could feel the music move through the space that I'm in rather than having it just so close up against my head. And that's a really important part of it too, because that's closer to how you would experience it in person.
Yeah. And then obviously the in-person experience is, of course, nothing beats it. You feel the impact of the drums in your chest the same way you would at a pop concert or something, with just the bass kick kind of really hitting into your chest. I mean, you feel the resonance of the instruments. And that's why people who love classical music or opera or whatnot, it's like they have to go see it live. The recordings are nice, but they're simply substitutes until they can go see it live the next time.
And when you go to an opera and you see the soloists, the singers, the soprano or the tenor up on stage singing, and there's no microphone on them.
Yeah.
And you're hearing this space, this throat projecting sound all the way through this entire hall and filling it with just one person's voice hitting this note perfectly in time. It's glorious. It's
really
glorious.
is
And opera is just as ridiculed in Western culture and just as lowest common denominator as like Italian culture that you said earlier.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's not over till the fat lady sings, right? Like that's how much we know about opera, right? It's like,
exactly.
But like, you're actually listening to the singing.
Yeah. It's really good. And it's just totally, again, like you have to kind of develop the ear for it. You have to go and spend some time with it. I certainly want to in the work that I'll be putting out, want to dive more into opera and how to make that more accessible. Because certainly like in the States, it's not super accessible even in terms of like being able to see one. Whereas like in Europe, sure, it's still, relatively obscure the same way that like listening to classical music would be, but at least there are outlets to go and see it. And you can't really get it until you go and see it. Like it's the same thing as you can read a Shakespeare play, but you're supposed to see it performed. You have to see it performed. And it's the same thing with an opera. It's like you could listen to the recording, but at some point you have to go see it performed because you don't know what the story is. You don't know, like you have to see it on stage. You have to see it acted out. There's all this. So anyways, definitely hope to be producing some materials in terms of helping people get into that because that world is amazing. I've very quickly fallen in love with it, and I hope to help others do the same.
It shows. I know it's getting a little late over there, and so I just want to offer everyone, and I'll put this in the opening monologue too. Everyone listening, you now have a homework assignment. Your homework assignment is to put on Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata or Act 1 to Wagner's Lohengrin on
not the entire Act 1, just the prelude.
Oh, just the prelude. The prelude.
Entire Act 1 would be quite a while.
Okay, and then to give it your full attention tonight. After listening to this, set aside 10 or 15 minutes, however much is both of them. Really listen to it, engage with it, and write down your thoughts. And I would like you to email me at rewire@renofmen.com, and then I want them to email you too, Evan. And
Wait, Rewire at Ren of Men?
Yeah, I started a rewire@renofmen.com.
Oh,
it's
nice.
So because at the end of the 5th video, I offered people a way to contact me after listening to it. So rewire@renofmen.com. So you can contact me there because that's how we'll know that people listen. Where do you want people, like this is not the end of the conversation, but I want people to do this homework assignment and to write down, I don't know, a paragraph, a few sentences of their experiences and send it to me and send it to you too, Evan. So like if people were to email you, where would they email you?
Evan,
because I want people to do this.
Yeah, it's just Evan, EVAN at rewirethewest.com.
Perfect. Because I want to keep the conversation going. I don't want that to be the end. But like we just gave something measurable and actionable for people to do that doesn't take a lot of time, that's very achievable. And I want everyone listening to go do that so they can get just the tiniest taste of what we're talking about. Because one of the things that I struggle with encouraging people to explore classic Western art in all of its forms is where to begin. Mm-hmm. Like what's something that I can do? And that's why I do my Poetry for Men series. It's like, here's 20 or 40, sometimes longer minute episodes about this singular work of art and this person that you can read and you can engage with and you can digest and you can move forward with. And so it's what's this little incremental step that people can take? Because sometimes that's all it takes is just the first step.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to highlight that for people so that they know that they can go do that. And I want to hear from people what their experience is like. And I think this is a perfect way to do that.
Oh, I would love that. That would make my week if you guys do that and actually write in, and that would absolutely make my week. I'd love to hear from people. I mean, that would be wonderful.
Me too. And then we can put it in an email or something like that and send it out to our list. Like, here's what people said. Okay.
Yeah. Well, it is, just so you know, we're about 7 minutes till 10 p.m. my time. So if there's anything else we'd love to tackle, let's go ahead and do that. This has been a wonderful conversation.
I'm looking at my notes that I've got here, and like we've started with travel and Italian unification and history and food. And where did you go?
I'm here.
Oh, okay. I lost the visual. Is your camera?
I can still see you and get everything.
Oh, I can't see you.
Oh,
So you disappear from the screen. Did you turn your camera off accidentally?
I don't think so. No,
Okay, well,
yeah.
okay, well, so people will just get to look at me. So
Sorry
that's
about
fine.
that.
No, that's fine. So I guess I do have one more question, which is like we've had this wonderful conversation about music, and what's a piece of painting or a piece of a painting or a piece of sculpture that has been equally moving to you that you can talk about, and then we'll wrap up the conversation.
Oh, okay.
Putting you right on the spot.
Yes, you very much are. A painting or a sculpture that's been very moving to me. Hmm. I think if I can perhaps take a cop out here, um, what I like most about any good statue or painting is just how it inspires me on. Like I think that a great statue in my mind, any sort of great statue is something that like I just look at it and I get automatically a feeling of heroism, a feeling of valor, like a feeling of something that points me to almost an ideal that has once existed in the collective minds of men and what has now gone, as Tolkien might say, into the shadows, but it's still there
Mm.
waiting to be uncovered. And whenever I see something that evokes that, it's that is what's really moving to me. So almost like there's so many sculptures that happens though, and they don't have to be anything that are even named. It's like I walk through London and I see a lot of these. There's a surprising amount, and they speak to heroism of the past. They speak to these ideals that you want to aspire to. Um, so all of those, I mean, that would be a lot of kind of where I turn. Um, Gosh, I'm not trying to avoid this because I would love to
It's
give an
okay.
answer. I'm just trying to rack my mind right now for like, oh my goodness, what
Well,
painting?
any piece of art, like something else, because we've given people a good place to start with Beethoven and Wagner. Like, what if you could name one other thing? It's like, okay, what would be my second step? Like for people that are
Uh,
super enthusiastic, something personally important to you, something that shows your history or your character or your values.
can I say a work of literature?
Of course.
Okay. Um, well, then I definitely turn to Shakespeare, and I would perhaps want to say Much Ado About Nothing, but it would require a lot more explanation.
Mm.
I'll actually turn to Macbeth, and this might be somewhat unexpected, but what I think Macbeth teaches is that what Shakespeare does really good in the beginning of the play is he outlines how Macbeth has nothing to drive him to commit the deeds that he does, namely murder and then more murder and tyranny, other than aspiration. There's no
Mm.
cause for resent. He is completely valued. He is held in high esteem. He is loved. He has everything that he could ask for and more. It is ambition that drives him. And and I think what's really interesting about Macbeth is that it shows the decay of a man who crosses a line that shouldn't have been crossed and then continues to cross it. He even says at one point, I've waded in so deep that were I to wade back, it'd be just the same as if I continue to go further. Like
Mm.
he's completely lost himself. Um, and all of Macbeth, how in any performance, how you interpret it, I believe it all comes down to the delivery of the tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day narrative or monologue at the end, and that's the one in which he says, "Life is but a walking shadow," and it kind of the deliverance of that. It makes you ask, is it an affirmation? Is it a resignation? What is it? And actually, if I can plug the film, the recent Apple adaptation, like their whatever the Apple Plus version was,
Hmm.
phenomenal. I think it's
Really?
I'm awful with actors' names, but I think it's Denzel Washington who is Macbeth, and it was incredible. I mean, I thought his delivery was spot on of that. But all this to say, the reason I'd recommend it as a next place to start is because I think it is, in terms of how it can apply to one's life, it is a very, very, very important warning. It is saying that you might not be a Thane of Scotland, but you could be the Macbeth of your own world if you want to. And in fact, not only could you be, but many, many people are. And I write about this in my ebook as well, the Bard and the Bees. I have a whole chapter dedicated to it, but it is a great place to start to see what Shakespeare can teach us, not only about human nature, but how he can actually save us from ourselves if we are willing to listen to the knowledge that he's putting forward.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for that. Evan, this has been a fantastic conversation that has been as narrative, story driven, as and symphonic as some of my favorites. In fact, thinking back of where we began to where we've ended up, it's just like I'm overjoyed. Thank you so much.
This has been a lovely conversation. Thank you so much, Will.
Yeah, thank you. So we'll just send people to rewirethewest.com, or where would you like to send people?
Yes, rewirethewest.com is great. I actually, funnily enough, it doesn't even link to the YouTube channel. So
I want to fix that.
Yes, I need to do that. Rewirethewest.com is great for resources. Okay, so for a lot more of the information regarding classical music, classic works literature, even some paintings. But excuse me, the YouTube channel, just Rewire the West. I think that's probably the best place to start, where I'll be sharing, messages about beauty, truth, and virtue, and how you can, look to works and the things that have come before in order to, again, live out beauty, truth, and virtue in your own life.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Once again, it's been a joy getting to know you. It's been a joy working with you, and this conversation has been a joy, and I'm looking forward to much more of this in the future.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Will.